So, the TV's ready, so I think we will call this meeting to order. Could we get a roll call, please?
Sure, at 6:02 PM, let's call Gary Tenenbaum,
Here.
Jennifer Riffle. Present. Katie Schwer. Here. Bill Infante.
Here.
Jackie Whitsitt. Here. Brian Slack.
Here.
Auden Schindler.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Team's present.
As always, we want to thank Grassroots for being here and broadcasting our movies live. If you don't catch it live, you can watch it on grassrootstv.org. Our videographer is Shannon Buckner. And tomorrow, the Mayor's Coffee is at Cece's from 8 to 8:30. If anybody who wants to come, please do. So our first item is the consent agenda. Are there questions about the consent agenda? Wait a minute. Oh, I guess it's just the minutes, so.
Mayor, I move the town council approve the consent agenda items as presented. Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, call to the public. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment for 3 minutes on anything that's not on the agenda? No? Okey-doke. However, we do have Northwest COG staff introduction, so could I ask you just to come up and give us your couple minutes of Dog and Pony Show? Because I hadn't met you till tonight.
Yeah, sure. Well, good evening. My name's Nate Wallowitz. I'm the Regional Broadband Director for Northwest COG. And I've been in my position since 2014, working across the region. We've had meetings with Ryan, and we've been talking about, and actually the first week that I started my position, Pickens County called and said, "Oh, hey, we've got some issues with our towers and public safety radio. Do you know anything about that?" And actually, I had just come off a contract designing standards for public safety radio, so it was kind of interesting to actually learn about their project, and that's become a huge part of the Pickens County overall broadband project. I'll talk a little bit about that. But I started in 2014, and I've been working directly with local governments, trying to start to put the building blocks together. My professional life, I came from consulting, and I started to look at the opportunity here in Northwest Colorado, and when the position was posted, I said, "Hey, this is really great. I can help bring rural broadband to reality." So that's how I got started. Worked with the Forest Service ski areas and the town of Red Cliff in Eagle County to get Red Cliff broadband. So that was a fun project. Lots of challenges, lots of politics, lots of meetings, but we got it done. And I'll talk about some success stories as we go along. You know, there are a lot of challenges in broadband. Probably the biggest challenge is getting people to realize what broadband is all about. There's all the technology and all the cool stuff and how we enable it, but it's really about building community and creating a community around the desire to improve broadband or deliver broadband, and not just any old broadband, but we pretty much have three objectives: affordable, reliable, and accessible broadband. Nothing better than that. And so I've been working with communities like Rio Blanco County. Their county commissioners in 2014 said, broadband and fiber optics are like building a highway through our county. And if we don't do it, nobody's gonna do it, because the providers aren't coming here to help us. So they want fiber loop around the towns of Meeker and Rangeley, and then they also put a wireless tower project up, and they've just completed the second phase of that project, and I think it's 94% of all their county residents can have access to broadband if they want it. And it's, on the fiber network, it's 1 gig up, 1 gig down to the home. So that's comparable to what Comcast would do on the way down, but it's much better than many other service providers can do. And that's a minimum speed. They can go up higher to help their communities. It is kind of interesting because I've looked at Basalt, I've talked about Basalt, and worked with Kara Silbernagel, who's the broadband, basically the broadband coordinator and special projects person for Pitkin County. They have Basalt on their radar to bring connectivity in to the town of Basalt. What you do with it, how you design your local policies around broadband, what kind of public-private partnerships you develop, that's all up to you. I've given Ryan a couple of copies of other communities' RFPs for having a consultant come in and put together a broadband plan. And actually, Ryan, I just completed a concept document for Grant County that I'll send over to you. Because they weren't ready to go all the way, but they wanted to understand where their challenges and opportunities were. So it's kind of a SWOT analysis for them. So I'll send you a copy of that so you can have a sense of that. But Pitkin County very much wants to work with you and wants to work with the community. I know there are commercial providers who, as soon as a community says we're connecting to a fiber backbone, they're just overrun with calls. And people want to come in and either put their own fiber in or do wireless or do a combination. And it's an amazing transformation. On the way down, I was talking to Brandy, the town manager for Town of Eagle. They are on, and I'll talk about Project Thor in a minute, we're bringing broadband into their community, and they are going to do their own broadband project, and they are going to be one of the providers for town. Comcast is coming in to Eagle as well, and their residents are saying, no, we really don't want anybody else. When's your fiber gonna get here? And her phone's ringing off the hook with providers that want to come in and help provide service in that community. One of the things to address the affordability issue and the reliability issue that we did as a COG is we realized that was a common problem across all our communities. If something happens and fiber gets cut all the way out at 285 on the way down from Conifer into Como, everybody in the mountains goes out. And it also affects the Roaring Fork Valley as well. So we looked at that and said, well, if we build a fiber loop around the whole region, leveraging existing fiber where we can do this in an affordable way. And so we created a project called Project Thor. We're connecting from Denver through the mountain areas of Jeffco, Clear Creek County, Summit County, Eagle. We come right into Glenwood Springs. Then we shoot down Highway 82. City of Aspen is one of our partners, so they're on the ring. They support Pitkin County, and Pitkin County is trying to create their own broadband solution for the entire Roaring Fork Valley, including doing broadband to the home for students as well. So they're really looking at this as a larger holistic initiative. And then Project Thor heads up to Meeker, Rangeley, and comes back around through Steamboat and back to Denver. And we're also supporting Grand County. So it's an extraordinary opportunity. We are, our first market, which is Summit County, launched. We are powering and enabling a commercial internet service provider to come into Breckenridge and do the Breckenridge Fiber 9600 product. So you bring broadband in, and it's amazing what happens. And really, when you look at broadband, you can't just look at it as technology. Broadband is truly about economic development. And broadband helps drive education, economic development, and community development as well. So there are a lot of benefits, and I'm actively working with the town. I look forward to being engaged more as you decide what directions you want to go and provide better broadband and improve services for your community.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you
You're
for coming
welcome.
over. Where do you
Thank you.
live?
I actually live in Evergreen, so I'm a commuter.
Holy cow.
But I have really bad internet service in my house. I'm right outside of the Front Range, and I can't get good broadband. So I saw the job posting in 2014, and I said, I feel their pain.
Yes, exactly. Well, feel free to leave some business cards with Ryan if you want to, so
Okay.
that any of us individually can reach out. And
Okay.
thank you again.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet.
Okay. Have a good evening. Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Okay, mayor and council reports. Anybody? Oh, wait, I have one announcement that I forgot to make at the beginning that was just a chat before the meeting started, and that is we were told, and I know we've been told this before, that any little noise like this is super, super loud on the microphone and into people's homes, so if we can all not tap, click, cough, choke. Just kidding. Candy wrappers, etc. Okay, message delivered. Okay, mayor and council comments. Bill?
I had sent around notes, as I do for Northwest COG, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to share with you, because in the event that people don't get to read those, this is an opportunity. I've reported previously, and I thought Nate might have mentioned something about a broadband forum for the purpose of pulling together regional interests on the topic of broadband extension into homes. As Nate said, some communities have 1 gig up, down. I have 7 megabytes up, down for the same price. It's deplorable, and something needs to happen. And so people will be getting together tomorrow at RMI from 1 to 4 to examine what may be possible. Because frankly, it's not evident that the change in solution is coming fast enough. And hopefully this will help, kind of goose movement. I was struck by the number of communities that are enacting tobacco 21 laws. We're ahead of that, so this is all good. They also have a lot of plastic bag bans. That was also surprising. I wonder if we might want to kind of contemplate that. Nobody said it was easy. A lot of them had become kind of the object of scorn and derision, but they nevertheless had these bag bans. And then the other notes that I had were about Dillon moving forward on a public-private partnership with the U.S. Forest Service under the 2018, whatchamacallit, Ag Bill. And basically what this does is open up options for the Forest Service to convey or transfer use of the property. And so it was very compelling. Carolyn Scour, the mayor, is doing some really, really good stuff. And I think there are some models that we might learn from. And that was about it.
Thanks, Bill.
You're very welcome.
Anybody else?
I do.
Yes.
I was just gonna update everybody on where Eagle County might be at with childcare and potentially workforce housing. They are going to be initiating community polling and really try to reach out to see if a kind of workforce housing and childcare tax is something they want to put on the ballot for 2020. So this is a pretty significant, endeavor by Eagle County. And so they have hired Bill Gray, who worked on ours, what's his last? Bill Ray. I was like, Gray, didn't sound right. He was wearing gray last meeting. But they hired Bill Ray to start to kind of work with the community and to, start polling to see if this is a possibility. And, it's one of those things where education is the key, and really, truly, they're starting to come up with some really good educational pieces to show you how far behind we are with childcare in this valley. And it's not just here, obviously, all through Eagle. If Eagle County goes through with this and they do something like about a half-cent sales tax or something like that, it could raise close to $18 million a year. So if it's combined with affordable housing, that's about $9 million each. And so they're not set on the amount, but the reality is there's a huge gap, because everyone thinks that sounds like a lot of money. It's not. Anyone who's produced affordable housing knows how much it costs. And right now, we're trying to deal with the parcel 2E, and we know how much that will cost to create childcare there. But this would be a great way to implement some funding. And so Ryan and I sit on the Child Care Coalition, and they'll be coming back here through the Child Care Coalition and then coming out to the community as in general. So I wanted to get everybody aware of that and to see, over time, how supportive we are as a council on that. I personally, very supportive. I won't speak for Ryan, but he's been part of this overall Child Care Coalition, working really hard on trying to find solutions to it. So I would like to see if there would be some ability, and if council supports it, to have potentially Eagle County and maybe Bill Ray come over the next month or two just to inform council of where they're at. And Ryan, if you want to add anything, I'm sorry.
No, that was a good explanation.
Is that it?
Yep.
Jennifer?
So there's so many exciting coalitions that are, shall we say, coalitions coalescing. And the Roaring Fork Valley Affordable Housing Coalition, the David Myler Group, they have a they've finalized the 2018 housing study, and that is a fantastic touchstone for Eagle County to utilize and for the entire Roaring Fork Valley, and to show an example of very positive multi-jurisdictional working together for all of us to work together to solve our issues, rather than just trying to do it each individually. So that study is coming, or it's already came out, but now it is actually finalized. That just occurred in the last month. With that, I'm also really grateful for Pitkin County being in the river at the Whitewater Park. Let's hope that they stick it this time. And we have a fantastic wave in a safer, fantastic, funner to ride wave in the spring. Our snow pack is looking favorable for us to be able to test it out and see how it is actually going to work. And then also I have a big gratitude for Pam for our town clerk and upcoming election with a 3-way mayoral runoff. Instant runoff. That's something new, and I commend you for the effort and communication that's going to go into that. And this,
community.
yes, it's going exactly, and so it's going to take the entire community, and I'm very grateful for all of those.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody else? X Games comments?
No. So, Bill, the Northwest COG meeting tomorrow, and then the Forest Service thing, are those things that staff is involved with, our town staff?
It was actually at the request of staff that we had scheduled the Northwest COG for tomorrow and brought them in. It's same thing with all the county stuff. On the Forest Service stuff, actually, this probably began with Scott Fitzwilliams, who had asked for ideas from the community when I had seen him in the context of Lake Christine and then in others. And so, yeah, they are. In fact, a lot of these things are showing up in the notes that I circulate. And I know that people don't always get around to those, but that's also why I try to bring it up at meetings like this to share these things. But it's an opportunity to share information, gain knowledge, and inform our decision-making.
So the Forest Service, that meeting is happening day after tomorrow, or when is it?
There's nothing formal. I guess Anna Bengstrom, who you know and Gary knows, is responsible for their conveyances. And so she's interested to come up, have a walk around the property, and share her views. A lot of this came from the article that many of you may have read that was written by Todd Hartley going back probably about 2 months, where he was basically commenting on the parcel and then on changes to the 2018 Farm Bill that just create new opportunities. So I think it's frankly great opportunity for everybody to learn a hell of a lot more about what might be possible, given that there has been no recent conversation about the property, but it's in our interest, in my opinion, frankly, to be ahead of this. With the changes in the Farm Bill, it's conceivable that there could be a plan that will be conceived by an outside interest, whether it be public or other private. And so to the extent that this Forest Service parcel, 70 acres, is within our planning area, we clearly have an interest in knowing what is going on, who might be kind of creating designs and gathering information. So I'll continue to share, and people are welcome to join tomorrow. I had extended the invitation. So if any of you are interested to join tomorrow for a very informal conversation, Anna wanted to come in with her boss, Scott Fitzwilliams, you may know, and he has been asking around for any potential solutions for the two properties, one up the Frying Pan, the other behind Crown Mountain. And I think it's a great effort, frankly, to be able to work towards a public-private partnership and to discuss what might be plausible.
Right. So I think that's great. Did staff ask to participate in that, or did you ask staff?
I guess,
Here's
share with me the point that you're
Here's
trying
my
to get to.
concern. I'm concerned about overloading staff with requests from council members, and this is an issue that I think all of us would support. But if staff is attending, is staff attending the meeting?
Tomorrow?
I do.
I'm not gonna be able to go tomorrow.
Okay.
I mean, tomorrow afternoon for the broadband thing, I'll be able to go for
Right.
a little bit, but
I would
not to
say,
the,
as a
Forest
council, we
Service.
should bring these to council and then get a majority, and in this case, it's probably everybody saying, staff, you do this, or here are the requirements, only because these guys are overwhelmed. We've talked about the need to add that. This is an issue that, I think it's appropriate to bring up at the beginning of the meeting and say this is something, and let's get consensus on.
I would suggest that we do raise this in probably a separate form, and it's about gathering information, informing decision-making, because we have requested conversation and discussion on numerous topics, and frankly, we don't have very much time to discuss if we are restricted to the time in council. And these are very material questions about the future of our town. And so, again, I think we do want to look at the ways that information is gleaned from a very large cohort of sources. And we, as elected officials, have every responsibility to speak to the highest level officials in the administrations that have bearing on us. So whether this is Scott Fitzwilliam or whether it's the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, I think the elected officials certainly have a responsibility to gather policy-level information that is then shared back in a timely and responsible way. And so I think that, we appreciate everything that comes from other people, and I would hope that this was a two-way street, Auden, where information was being shared. Ryan and I did talk about, kind of this notion that this is creating work. I think we, have different views on this. It is information gathering that will permit us to better represent the views and will of our citizens.
can I
Yes.
just say something real
And then
quick? I
Gary.
think where I was coming from on whether it be the Forest Service parcel or it be a forum on broadband, we take our cues from a work plan that came from this council. And so, my view is that, we set off at the beginning of the year trying to, get underway with these tasks. And, as it related to the broadband forum, I think that it wasn't made clear to the council, nor, really to me initially that, that was going to be happening. And I think it could have been, just vetted a little better, and the timing of it could have been, made a little more clear so that we can have as broad of an audience. I'd been meeting as a staff person with my counterparts throughout the region, and, beginning discussions to see where we could go. So this seems like a little bit of a redundancy, and that was what I was trying to convey. And then, I think the issue with the Forest Service, I think that's great, but I think also it would be good for the rest of council to have an awareness of that meeting, and then also a better understanding of what's Basalt's interest in that specifically. It's not a piece of land that we've contemplated for development in our master plan, in our growth area. And, I don't know that Eagle County will be represented there or not, but it was just kind of short notice. So, I think it's usually that council is kind of giving me the marching orders on, what you want to do, and then we can run out and tackle that for you. Now, that's not to say that council members can't go have meetings with folks, but when you're kind of creating forums, I think that kind of changes the face of what it is and the impression that that gives other governments who might get a little confused as to what Basalt is pushing versus an individual council member. So, I think that's the importance for me, is just kind of staying in our lanes and understanding what I can do to facilitate that for you. And if you want to jump ahead on a certain project, one that's, really important to you, by all means, but please have a conversation with me about it so I can explain, hey, we've started on 4, 5, and 6 other projects. I'm gonna have to put the brakes on one in order to put this, fill this in. So I think that was the only point that I was really trying to make in the whole thing is, I think we all wanna be working in the same direction, which is, a good thing at the end of the day.
Gary?
Well, that was, what Ryan's point was, is like, just like the childcare thing I brought up, I'd like people, if they're gonna do something beyond, especially if it's not on that at all, which the Forest Service is not, is to bring it before talking to other folks, because sometimes, as an elected official, they think you're talking for the council.
Right.
And on certain pieces of time, you're not, unless it's something that we have on that piece. So like with the forest, it would be great to check in with us, and then set it up for a future meeting to really say, and see if we all agree, or at least the majority agrees. And that's just the way I'd love to see it, because that's the way I'm gonna bring it back with the childcare thing, because these are big issues. So like, what they do with the Forest Service piece is a big issue. Childcare, if they actually go for some type of tax initiative, that's a big issue, and I want to make sure that everybody's on board with where Ryan and I are going on that, because, maybe I supported a ton. I need to make sure everybody supports it on the council, and that we can represent that I have that. So that's all.
Jen?
I'm gonna switch gears real quick and go back to a previous comment about looking at bag taxes and bag bans, and just from an informational standpoint, it was on a Basalt ballot, and that was, I believe, in 2014, and it did not pass. So, just,
Telling you what others are doing.
okay, great.
But again, I would only posit that it is valuable to have this conversation. I don't know that tonight's the night, but when elected officials have conversations with other elected officials, this is not to be admonished. When we gather information and share it regularly in written and oral form, frankly, the paradox of being admonished for not communicating is just weird to me. So I really do, I want to take this back, and I think it's a subject that we will bring up in the next council, because we as counselors are not potted plants. We are not here solely for the purpose of saying yea or nay on perfunctory things. It is our responsibility to represent the will of the electorate and to gather as much information as we can and share that as broadly as possible. And so to the extent that there is very limited dialogue, very limited discourse. Childcare, we heard about it for the first time tonight. Gary, you're right. Thank you. But you've been having the conversations for 2 years that I've been on council. This is the first we've heard of it.
No, Gary talks about it all the time.
Are you
Look,
talking?
we need to- okay.
answer that, please, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
yes, all right.
Bill,
fine.
that is absolutely wrong, and I really wish you would have a different discourse on it, because I don't feel like a potted plant, first of all. Secondly, this childcare thing honestly came at the last meeting. They are just starting to look at this now. So instead of, the reality is we just need to be as a council, to be together as a council, or together as a majority, because it's really bad for one of us to be going out there and truly representing council, especially the Forest Service is where I'm talking about. We do not have that in a work plan. It is not in our urban growth boundary. It's something that we should talk about, but we should come together to talk about it. So that's where I'm at.
And
Okay, we're done with this part of the conversation. Let's stop. We can have this conversation at a different time. I think that Bill's right. This is maybe requires more in-depth and maybe more discussion like we had when we're all first elected about you speak with one voice. If you don't have 4 votes, you don't have a voice at all. So let's just regroup and come back when we don't have people waiting for their
Jackie, can I just
discussion.
frame it? It'll be 30
One
seconds.
little frame.
Just, Ryan, this is for you when a new council comes in. One of the things that was hardest for me to figure out was, how do you get an issue in front of council that is important? This is what you're talking about. And the short answer is you can't conscript staff into doing stuff. You have to get the majority. And I think the path is bring it to you and then and then you can, ask council members. But I think before the next council comes in, they should have a little training on, hey, you have an issue, here's what you want to do. It's, tied to what you'll do legally and so forth.
Okey doke. Okay, our next item is, I had one thing. I forgot where we were. We're still on mayor and council reports. And I just wanted to thank all the folks in Basalt who have thrown the hats into the ring to run for office, including Bill and Gary, not Gary, Jen. They sit close to each other. One's a man, one's a woman, but you know what I mean. So it's a very brave thing to do, and there's, I think, 6 people running for council and 3 people running for mayor, so give them your condolences when you see them on the street. Secondly, I wanted to say that, and maybe Katie can help me, and Ryan, last week we went to the Eagle Valley Climate Change Summit or whatever, and listened to, name the guy.
Dr. Davies.
And I'm sure Auden
Dr.
knows
Robert
Dr.
Davies.
Davies. And it was, everyone knows that climate change is a huge issue. We have passed a resolution to make climate change a #1 priority and an emergency. But also the next day that Ryan and I stayed for the Colorado Association of Ski Towns meeting, there was a less dark presentation about solutions and what real things that we need to be doing to get this thing turned around in immediately. So the Glenwood Springs manager wants to bring in, another name I forgot, Kim.
Yeah, she's in charge of the, no, she worked for a nonprofit, but she was
Walking
talking about the
Mountains.
Eagle County environmental plan. Whose name?
She's at Walking Mountains.
That's what it is.
Yes, but anyway, so the Glenwood manager brought up the idea of bringing her in for a regional conversation about, so that may be something that we will be asked to support, which it'll come back to us at some point. So, any other, okay, manager's report.
So I've got 2 things. I'll try to be quick, though they're both somewhat weighty topics. So the first is, just wanted to give a bit of follow-up. So the flood mitigation that we completed as of December 24th. So due date on that was the 26th. All work had to be done. So we pushed really hard up until the end to get all of the projects completed. So they were completed successfully. And so that's the good news. There is a bit of challenging news in this, but so it looks like of the $1.3 million that we had to spend, there was an overage of about $56,000 total. So we're trying to figure out, kind of why did this happen, and a couple things, led to this. One of which was that the scope during the project was a little bit of a creeping scope. As you recall, we had a flood in the middle of our project and ended up adding the flood mitigation sort of down the middle of the hill district. And then we also, toward the end of the project, when we looked and saw that we had some money left, added the 2 basins that were constructed last up above the Elgibel Trailer Park. And so those ended up being pretty expensive. We were pushing really hard to get them done. They had to bring in some pretty big equipment to get those, to get a lot of dirt moved. And so, so at any rate, that's where we are as far as cost goes. And the one piece on that, as we were going through the project management of it, meeting weekly, talking through these things, we had kind of two different things at play. So every time we started a new project, there was a cost estimate and then a not to exceed. And I think as we went through the project management, some of those cost estimates were used as numbers in the budget instead of the not to exceed numbers, just to kind of be more conservative. And so at any rate, I think at the end of the day, we would have done all of the work anyway, because it'll protect, these structures. Of $1.3 million, the $56,000 is an overage, but, it's not a big one. We are actively talking to Eagle County about that, because as you recall, we were in partnership with them about possibly splitting it, and then, may talk to the project manager, SGM, a little bit more about that too. I did put calls into the NRCS to see, hey, is there any possible way for us to get some more money out of this? And it doesn't look like it. We would have had to ask before the deadline, and of course, with that final project being the one that really pushed us over, we didn't know because the bills weren't into us yet. And then finally, we called the state too. So we did have a grant from the state, and that I haven't heard back from them yet to see if there's any money, but I've followed up at least twice, so I'm not holding my breath on that one. But anyway, so that's how it shakes out. I'm going to be talking to Eagle County staff, their manager and engineering staff this week, just to see about, sharing those costs, and then we'll see where we go from there. So I'll keep you all apprised of that.
Jackie, hey, quick question.
Yes, sir.
Ryan, all that was awesome, awesome work, and it looks good. There is, I'm sure you've heard, there's a pool of water on Sopers. You've got that.
Sopers Lake.
Yeah, Sopers Lake. So unintended consequences.
Can we
with
stock
doing
that? My
work.
question was, can we stock that with perch?
Right
or-
now, it looks like you probably could. So we're gonna try. I had Public Works went out and cleaned up all the ice, and then we had some good melt yesterday. But that's gonna turn into an ice sheet again. So those blocks are pretty tight. So we may try to see if we can remove 1 or 2 of those blocks during the winter time to let the drainage occur as it would, so it would go onto the McLaughlin's property there, as it had historically. And then in the summertime, when we actually have the threat of flooding, we would put those blocks back in place. So that's one solution we have. Unfortunately, there's just a low spot in the road right there. So one of those things.
Was that a motion on the perch?
I didn't make the motion.
Okay.
Just a suggestion.
I thought I heard that, okay.
And then the other thing, so last week, prior to going to the CAS meeting, I went to Eagle County, sat down with the manager as well as their landfill person, the folks we've been working with on the recycling events. And so, you know, I think we've got a pretty good outline of what the recycling efforts would look like coming up. You know, on January 31st, we are noticing folks at the site that the recycling center will close. We're looking at 2 dates this year for sort of hitting it hard with the hard to recycle events. And one would be in the spring, like April to May timeframe, and then probably in the fall. But items that would be recycled include hazardous household waste, so people could get rid of their paint and motor oil, things like that. We probably would have some containers for trash there too. Kind of make it a community cleanup as well, so that folks that have like couch or, you know, something that's kind of hard to get rid of, that they could, you know, clean up their property. Then e-waste, of course, is a big one for that. Tires, cardboard, paper shredding, so people could shred their paper and then that would get recycled. And then we also want to do yard waste. So I'm going to try to see if we can coordinate that with more wildfire mitigation, like in the hillside or in other properties. So working with the fire district and then Eagle County's fire specialist, Eric Lovegren, for that. So, you know, hopefully it can kind of be a little bit of a two-folded thing, but and then, you know, I think we'll also be putting out some information to folks about recycling. So if they can get access to curbside recycling, who they can call, what the prices are, and that kind of thing, just for those that had used that. And then I would reiterate once again that, you know, the Pitkin County landfill currently, as well as South Canyon down in Glenwood, they do take recyclables for free. And then, you know, I think we heard from you all, and we'll continue to look at that as, you know, what more can we do on the not recycling, but what's the word I'm looking for? Composting front, and see what options we have available. I think we do want to do some composting events as we've done, separate and apart from these, for leaves and yard waste and the like. So, so that's where we are with that. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Brian. Okay. First item, first reading, ordinance number 4, and I just read it, frist. An ordinance of the town approving a license agreement for the encroachment of an existing garage and greenhouse in the town's right-of-way at 216 East Homestead Drive. Sarah and Jerry.
Good evening, Council. Again, I'm Sarah Nadolny with the Town's Planning Department, and Gerald Terwilliger, sorry, Jerry, is joining us here this evening. So this hearing is about the renewal of a license agreement for the property at 216 East Homestead Drive, the Terwilliger residence. To let you know where this is located, we have Midland Avenue here, Homestead. For those of you who aren't familiar with where the residence is, it's right where the star is. The property was originally granted a variance in 2000 from the Board of Zoning Adjustments to allow a reconstruction of a garage into the right-of-way. So you can see with this kind of dark picture in this Google image that the building does abut the sidewalk directly, and there's another image from a site visit that we went on yesterday. So the original approval was for 10 years, and the applicant received a 10-year renewal from council in 2010. The current agreement set to expire in early March of this year, so the applicant's here today and he's seeking to renew the license agreement to continue to allow the encroachment. So unlike the past approvals, the town attorney has suggested this round we do a revocable license agreement for the encroaching building in order to get around that 10-year approval process. The applicant's indicated he's amenable to this, but would prefer that the town consider giving him or allowing him to purchase the right-of-way. So staff has discussed this, kind of feel reluctant to give up the right-of-way for a couple of reasons. There has been some inquiries on Homestead Drive in the past that weren't supported by staff for right-of-way, as well as the fact that the town may be interested in making improvements to the right-of-way along Homestead sometime into the future. So again, this is first reading of the ordinance. Staff recommends hearing from the applicant and of course taking public comment. And you can let staff know if you have any questions or if you would like to have anything presented at second reading. Thank you.
Well, I'm mainly here to answer any questions that might come up. Homestead has been improved, that's why there's a sidewalk there since we moved in 1980. And I don't see that there'd be any change in that streetscape myself. However, I'm comfortable with the contract that is being offered.
This is a first reading, and I don't think we really have time to take public comment because it's not a public hearing.
It is an ordinance. It's ordinance number 4, series of 2020.
Is it it doesn't say that it's public hearing. Are we supposed to do a public hearing on a first reading?
No, not a second reading. Yeah, a second reading.
Let's just wait till second
Okay,
reading
absolutely.
then, if that's okay with everybody. Okay, any comments here regarding this? I remember the first one, the first time you did this. Like 30 years ago or something.
Oh, 20.
Okay, 20.
We're not that old yet.
If no questions, is there a motion?
Quick question.
Yes,
Is this
sir.
we're approving a revocable permit?
Correct.
Is that what's happening?
They will give me 6 months to remove it
Okay.
and $100,000. No, back.
Mayor, I move that town council approve ordinance number 4, series of 2020 on first reading and set the public hearing and second reading for February 11th, 2020.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There you go, Jerry.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, 7B, public hearing and ordinance number 1, series of 2020, an ordinance of the town amending Chapter 4, Article 8 of the Basalt Muni Code to eliminate the 1% for art program. We're doing these separately, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
we'll
even
go
though they're all on one page, all right.
So I'll take this one, Madam Mayor. So at the first reading, I just kind of outlined the fact that we had this in place since 2016. There's been at least one instance on the underpass that we waived the requirement for the 1%. We haven't been regularly collecting it on the improvements. I think one of the struggles that we have when we're doing the budget is we take a look at the deferred maintenance in forms of our public infrastructure as well as the facilities, and we struggle to keep up with that. And so kind of cutting into that over time has been a little bit of a challenge. And then we also took a look at the fact that we have another funding source currently through 2 different RETAs that can be used for public arts, and that's what's been funding BPAC now. I did call Jeff from BPAC and just had a conversation with him about it. And one of the things that he thought, he said, yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from. My concern is like if you build a new building, like a new town hall or something like that, that you would have some money set aside for art within that building, public art within or without. And so, I think that's perhaps something that is addressed on the when and if we do those types of projects. I would also say that in reading the ordinance, one of the things that it mentioned was landscaping, for example, as counting as art. If you look at the underpass project, for example, we certainly addressed that pretty heavily, I would say. So, I think we met the intent of, or the spirit of the ordinance there. And so staff is just, making recommendation that we clean this up for now. If there's a different approach in the future, should the RETAs not be working, then, you know, we could certainly look at that, but, for now, here's where we are.
Okay. Questions, anybody? We have, yeah.
I do. I did want to circle back around in this, because when we voted 2 weeks ago, again, I guess I probably didn't ask for enough information, but now having had the benefit of 2 weeks to look a little bit more closely into it, I'm concerned about a couple things. As you know, I am a strong proponent of funding for the arts. I will advocate for that. And I was disappointed to see that we were looking to repeal a potential source of funds for the arts. And I find this particularly disappointing this year when our capital improvements budget is $7 million plus, and some or much of that could potentially qualify and thereby generate as much as $70,000 for the arts. And that in itself is quite important to me. But I guess the bigger issue, and Jeff, I'm going to refer this to you because I'd like to ask for your opinion, but if we passed an ordinance in 2016, and if ordinances have the weight of law, are we not obligated to implement the ordinance and the law? And the fact that we didn't collect and didn't implement, is that not a problem? Is it not an example of governance or a failure to implement the rule of law? And so I wanted to put that back to you, because if we have not implemented this law for whatever reason, it would seem to me that it should have been repealed if it was impractical and we had identified that early. But 4 years later, to simply say, well, we made a mistake, but we didn't implement this law, it raises big questions for me about governance and our commitment to implementing a rule of law.
Sure, so when, excuse me, so when the ordinance was passed, I guess in 2016 to create the program, the staff was charged with implementing that. I think Ryan spoke to, probably speak some more as to how this has actually functioned administratively. I do know that for various reasons it's been difficult or impractical to manage administratively. I'm not really sure what you're asking in terms of.
Well, if you pass a law, you have to implement it. So if you pass a leash law, for instance, it has to be implemented. If it's not implemented, you shouldn't have passed it in the first place, would be the basic logic.
Sure.
And if you pass a law and you find that it is unworkable, then.
So this is, distinguishable from something that would fall under, using the town's police powers to regulate the behavior within the town, like something with the leash laws, is different than this, which is more of an administrative measure to ensure that some of the funding that's used for capital project, a portion of that is also allocated for the arts. So those are, there's a there's something to be distinguished there in terms of the application of what the code change is. For example, I guess I would view this more akin to, if there was something within the code calling for an administrative action like a committee to be formed or something that wasn't formed, the recourse is to try to go ahead and make sure that's formed. So, in terms of the past, I really don't have, I think, a lot to offer or other analysis at this point. But what this ordinance is proposing to do is simply just remove that requirement based on the experiences of staff that it has been difficult to and impractical to implement as a policy measure.
I'm gonna just ask a question to
Sure.
follow that up. I guess I see what Bill is saying here is that, is there a standard or a legal requirement if we do pass an ordinance that we
Sure.
comply with our ordinance? I mean, I'm just trying to follow up to get a clear
Yeah.
answer on this, or do we have, I think the previous manager actually maybe brought it back to council on the underpass to say this is more money than we can possibly come up with. because the cost of the underpass was so huge, and brought it back to the council, and we said, okay, then we can't do it. So I just to get it a little cleaner answer.
Okay,
Yes.
sure. I mean, when an ordinance is passed and there's a law, there's a, you don't get to ignore it, right? It does get to be implemented. When it is of an administrative nature, I think that is different than something that is of a exercise of the town's police powers. Those are different things. So, as a general matter, yes, when an ordinance is passed, that is something that shouldn't be ignored, should be followed, should be implemented. I don't really know where you would like me to speak more as to, okay, well, what if it doesn't? What if it is not?
Well, I mean, I guess it just, because then the next question from me would frankly be, well, to the extent that this was an administrative ordinance, does this mean then that all administrative ordinances should be interpreted to be discretionary? We don't have to implement them. Because that's effectively what you're saying with this. It was an administrative ordinance. It provided we adopted a policy to allocate 1% of eligible construction costs of town capital improvement projects for the arts. So if we're supposed to do it, we should have done it. I'm not arguing that we don't have the right to repeal it. What I'm concerned with is that we spent 4 years not implementing an ordinance, and it raises significant questions to me about where else we may be, remiss in implementing ordinances that we have adopted. And I wonder why we have not implemented this one.
Can we let Auden go, just in case he has something that ties in?
My understanding of it is that we've rejected it repeatedly. It's come back to us. We've said, no, we can't do it. We're taxing the capital budget to fund arts, and we don't have enough capital budget, so it doesn't make any sense. So it hasn't, as I understand it, unless I'm missing something, it hasn't been ignored. It's been implemented, but not funded because council each time has said no. That's what you're describing with the underpass. So the point, I think, is that it doesn't make any sense, and we're rescinding it.
I think there's also another piece of information in there that, in what color of money is appropriate to use on this. Post money, for example, if you do an improvement in post, there's not explicit language in what the voters passed to say that this goes towards arts. And so as in those capital improvements, are you allowed to use it for that? I think that's an interpretation that you would all have to make, but not one that has necessarily been made. And then I also think, you look at, as far as improvements, does that mean when we repair a section of sidewalk that, we're gonna carve out that 1%? When does it actually kind of reach that? And I think it was, not extremely clear on those. And so there have been some instances, Susan had said, where the money was, apart from the underpass, that in the past there were, RETA funds that were used to meet that requirement. But as far as coming out of the general fund, I think it's just remained a challenge. We've identified a lot of, deferred maintenance, and so.
Gary?
Well, I mean, we were here when we implemented this. The idea was a good one. I mean, it was a really, we try to find a way to implement money for the arts. It's just that every time we had a big project, we were like, oh my God, so we have to put another $60,000 from the capital budget. So we always said, no, we're not gonna do it. And so we have acknowledged it, but we said no. And I just think, that it's really difficult for staff to administer because which projects hit it. So really, truly, I don't think this is a legal issue because we've always said and acknowledged it in bigger projects especially and said no. So I look at it going, I think we are funding art and we'll continue to fund art. It's a priority to me. I just don't think this is the way to do it.
So I guess first I apologize if my answers before were a little bit unclear, but no, ordinances that become part of the code, these are not discretionary things. Speaking more broadly. Now, as to the 1% for the ARPS program, I recalled that, based on council discussion, that there is a provision in that program that allows council to exempt funding to the program on certain projects. And that, I believe, is what has happened. So the program exists and has been, I guess, implemented. But it has been practical to fully implement, in part because, as you've said, there have been these projects that have come along where it didn't make sense to do so. So I just wanted to clear that up in terms of the legal point of view on this.
So this is a public hearing, so let's see if we have anybody in the audience who has got concerns about this as well. We'll open the public hearing at 7:02. Is there anybody out there that has comment regarding this? Okay, hearing none, we will close the public hearing. Have we beat this horse to death? Do we? need
I
have-
motion that we adopt ordinance number 1, series of 2020 on second reading.
Second?
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed?
No,
Okay.
on the basis of my concerns about governance.
Thank you. Next one is public hearing and ordinance number 2, an ordinance of the town amending chapter 2, article 3, officers and employees of the Basalt Municipal Code to eliminate the personnel review board. Ryan?
Yes, so again, second reading, and sort of what we explained during the first reading, this personnel review board is a bit of a relic in our code. It's not a committee that exists, and at least in the recent past, asking some of our more tenured staff, they don't recall that it had been in place. I think some of the issues identified with it, the committee was contemplated to be set up using council and members of the community. I think we get schooled pretty regularly on council members not being involved in personnel matters, and that's actually enumerated in the code, and so this kind of runs contrary to that. And then, I think as it relates to having, community members that may or may not be experts in HR, are you making a subjective call or an objective call? And so I did follow up with Mountain States Employers Council just to kind of see what the general practices are around this, and they corroborated essentially what my position has been, is that these are somewhat obsolete now. You'll see them in some circumstances, like where towns might have unions, or in certain like police force situations, but in general, they're not seeing it. Part of the reason for that is in the past, and this probably dates back to the time when jobs were looked at as a property right, and that has changed now and is also enumerated in our employee manual, where the it's essentially a right to work, or a what's the word I'm looking, employment at will. So the face of employment has kind of changed. This all came about when our auditors picked up on it and just asked, is this something you guys have as a standing committee, and recommended that if it's not something that we're actively using, that probably just get it off, make it a kind of clean up our books in that regard. So we continue to support removing this, and
Thank you for checking on that with Mountain States, because I was the one who had asked for that, because I am familiar with personnel review boards, so that's good to know, that even in a different configuration, it's still not really the trend.
yeah, you're not seeing as much.
Okay.
Just 2 other data points on that. It's not something that exists for statutory cities and towns, and then in reviewing other home rule communities, the vast majority of them do not have something like this as well.
I think it's sort of rare. Okay, this also is a public hearing. We'll open the public hearing at 7:06. Anyone out there have a comment regarding this? Hearing none, we'll close this public hearing.
I did.
Yes.
I also wanted to ask about this one, because after thinking about it, I too have learned that It is not common to have these personnel review boards at statutory or at municipal levels. But I am concerned, and this gets to the point that Jackie raised last week, to the extent that the Personnel Review Board functioned as a complaint mechanism or as a grievance mechanism, I just wanted to ask what our process is to provide staff recourse in the event that there is a grievance or complaint that they want to file. How do we handle that?
So if a staff person has a grievance, they can go to their department head. If their grievance is with their department head, they can come to the town manager. And so, you know, there's a process that, you know, the grievance gets investigated, and, you know, once investigated, kind of that response goes back to the employee, with the findings, and then if something is found, you know, there's, you know, sort of different steps for discipline. So, you know, somebody could be suspended, somebody could be talked to, there could be a write-up. So there's sort of, you know, different levels. And then ultimately, you know, if it's something that is raised to a level that, you know, is a little more touchy or maybe outside the expertise of, you know, town staff, we use Mountain States Employers Council, and they can go and do an investigation that's a third-party investigation. You know, they have attorneys on staff that can do that for you. And then ultimately, if somebody has a grievance against the town manager, then that goes to the mayor. And you have those, you know, for the council to deal with and investigate, so.
Okay, thank you. Good work. Any other questions or motion?
Mayor, I move the town council approve ordinance number 2, series of 2020 on second reading.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 7D, public hearing, ordinance number 3, series of 2020. An ordinance of the town amending chapter 1, article 4, general penalty of the municipal code to conform the penalty provisions in state law. This is a fun one, Jeff.
Yes, so the town's code has a general penalty provision. The town's code is required to set forth what the maximum penalties are for violating the town code. By statute, the maximum incarceration period went from 1 year to 364 days, so there is a corresponding change made here in the ordinance. The code also referenced the fee schedule for the maximum fine amount, and in the draft at first reading, this provision said what the statutory maximum is, which is $2,650. There's one minor change from first reading to second reading, and that is just to refer to the state statute for what the maximum fine is in the event that that were to change, because that's something that does change from time to time. It went from $1,000 to $2,650 several years ago. And so that was a change from first reading to second reading, is just to refer to that statutory section rather than the actual fine amount.
That was as interesting as it was the first time. Okay, this is public hearing as well. Anybody in the public have a comment? Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing. Council, anybody?
Mayor, I move that the town council approve ordinance number 3, series of 2020 on second reading.
Second.
Further discussion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Great, okay, the fun stuff. Work session, master plan discussion with P&Z, Ryan Mahoney and Susan Philp. And I will just say up front that at the last meeting, we did take one public comment, but we will not be taking public comment regarding this master plan. It's a work session just before, basically, planning commission, council, and staff. So
why don't we have, where are our consultants? Are they? They're in. Okay, let me grab them. You guys come on up to the table.
Do you want consultants up there first? That might be more useful, and then we'll come up after.
You know what, they can just be at the side. I think it'd be great if you guys just got your
Okay, who's
three.
gonna speak first?
I was gonna say a couple words and then Heather and
Oh, here they come.
right by James, probably.
You know, at
when Heather talks, she'll be able to.
Whole 30? January, no booze, no Gary. Sugar.
I'm gonna have you, when you're talking, talk up here at the mic.
Snacking.
They covered it to keep the flies out. That's a good idea.
That's actually my number one problem.
Is it green
I don't
or
eat
is
bad
it-
things, but I will eat, of course, it's the cookie. 16. No, it's because, that's why I can't lose weight, because
As long as it works.
You got one, all right.
I prefer, not to have to. Running is one of those things that I really love to do. It just pains knees get pained. After about 4 miles, I'm like, I just ran the other day down.
So Heather, you just be right on deck, since you're gonna talk first after I just give it.
it makes me OCD to eat like that. I don't wanna be like that. I can't, I re-
Did you actually run a marathon, or you
but
did
you
that
can
like
do
that?
that because you,
And then woke up in a sweat. Okay.
okay,
Okay, so we have a work session, and we were originally going to remove from the more formal table and have our work session in the middle. The P and Z actually had kind of asked that we really operate this as a work session. So it's gonna, what we'd like to do is just to be a little less formal in this and have it be more of a work session. You might hear more from Ryan and me as if we think that the conversation is going off track a little bit. Our main goal today, Heather's gonna go over the goals of the meeting, but our main goal was really to understand from the P and Z why they made the recommendations they did. We had our first meeting on the master plan at the last meeting, and we really didn't give ourselves enough time to have a meaningful discussion with the council and with the P and Z. So really, that's our goal today. So what we're gonna try to do is keep these introductory kind of comments and framework. We wanna kind of reset the stage of what we're doing, and we want to keep that to 10 minutes, then turn it over to the P and Z to talk and have a dialogue. And we are hoping for 2 hours, and we are, running behind on our calendar. So maybe we can do a time check when we're about an hour in to kind of see what we're doing. But I'm gonna turn it over to Heather right now, so we can kind of get through the first 10
okay,
minutes.
just quickly, what do you mean informal? If you mean just like people talk when they want to, then you need to run the meeting, because with 15 people here, that will make this go on forever.
I think, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go, you go.
Yeah, no, I think that we, can still have you chairing. I think the informality of it is such that, kind of when you're sitting at the dais, it seems
It's
formal,
creepy,
and
for
you
sure.
can't kind of hover around a table and talk about stuff. So I think it was more like people from the planning commission and council can feel comfortable to kind of share their ideas and provide a little bit more direction to staff, and then to the consultants, what can we do to make certain aspects more clear. I think I heard some comments at the last meeting that, I may chime in on if I hear them repeated, just to kind of clarify, where in the plan something might be, or kind of what the intent of something in the plan was, how the plan acts as a roadmap for us to achieve a vision, those kind of things.
Okay,
So
all I care is that people ask for the floor, because there's way too many
I
people
think
here.
that's great.
Okay.
So Heather, you're on deck.
Madam Mayor, may I have the floor?
You can have all the floors.
All one floor. Thank you. I think the other piece too is that we're gonna keep our time talking and presenting really, really short. So that's a big part of this too, so that there's a lot more time to take the floor and have sort of this work session aspect. James, the next slide. So hopefully you all saw this. This is what we'd like to get through today. Again, we'll kind of do time check, but all of this is really important to get through because we end with schedule too, and we heard that the last time, so we want to make sure we get through that. So the very first thing that I'm going to talk about is kind of our first bullet point. So this overview of what is the master plan. And so I think the last time there were like a lot of assumptions. We've been doing this for a year, and so we all know what we're doing. And so we wanted to kind of take a step back for a minute and just revisit that at its somewhat basic level, but then a little bit specific level. So first, this is a communication plan, okay? So this is how we communicate to landowners and developers about what the community really wants. What is the vision that came out of the citizens, and what are the priorities and things like that, right? So ultimately, it's a communication plan. So when someone comes to the town and says, I want to do this, they know whether that's a fit or not. So that's kind of this first one and very important. That communication is also extremely important for future people, the future Basalt, and that's future people sitting in your seats, but also future citizens, et cetera, okay? So this is a plan that gets to evolve with the community, but does have a starting point, and that starting point is gonna be this 2020 master plan. So that's important to understand. Second is, it is an implementation plan. Now, two very specific places, or three really, that you see that are in the goals and objectives. Those are objectives. They are things that came out of this effort that the community would like to see move forward. There were projects, okay? And we had some comments last time, my gosh, some of those are little projects, some of these are huge projects, okay? But that is part of the implementation plan of this. And then lastly, you'll see our, the green action plan, okay? And those are action steps as well. What the master plan does not necessarily do is say how. Exactly how are we going to achieve all those things? That's where you really take this, what is 10 years, and you start to break it down as a group. You know, whether it's town staff and administration, whether it's outside people that are helping to participate, like the amazing, you know, arts and the culture in town, things like that, right? They're taking that on to move some of those things forward. So the how is not necessarily distinguished in the plan, but it's important to understand in those three places, you all, your committees, and the community have set what some of those priorities are. What are some of these important things that we'd like to see move forward, okay? Lastly, this is a policy document. So this is probably one of the most important pieces, and where you may see Susan or us or planning and zoning like kind of chime in at times to say, okay, we've crossed the line between policy and something different, meaning your legally and quasi-judicially binding documents, like your zoning code, for example, or annexation agreements, okay? So it's important to understand that the master plan should really set policy and kind of put, you know, arms around what you'd like to see happen. But you have to be careful that you don't go in too far into your master plan, okay? So that may be places where we say, hey, that's one to kind of table and start putting together a list of these ideas for, say, the zoning code and changes to that. So two really good examples of that, okay, that we heard the last time was this idea of like a incentives or bonus kind of structure, right? So there were green bonuses. How do we incentivize green building that might go above and beyond our existing building code? And then one of the others was just like density incentives or sort of growth incentives. So those are both really good ideas. So a couple of things I want as we get into some of those discussions, start to think about and hone in on, okay? So green bonuses, right now you'll see in the green action plan, that's page 116 and 117, you'll see certain statements around that. So there is a statement that says, I'll paraphrase a little bit so I don't have all hundreds of pages memorized, but it basically says incentivize net zero buildings, you know, create a program that incentivizes net zero buildings, okay? So this master plan doesn't quite know how to do that yet, so it's now in your action plan, in the green action steps, to move that forward. So you have an action step that says, this is where we want to put energy in the coming however long, okay? So that's one place. You'll also see green bonuses and that kind of that idea in the goals and objectives. We respond to that. We try to capture how we can move that forward. We all still have to figure out the how. The idea of density, for example, or kind of growth bonuses. Part of what the master plan wants to do is put parameters around that. what might our baseline density be? And if we want to create incentives, what are the brackets? What am I going to give you that we would like back? Now you have to remember, going back, this is a policy document and not a legal document. So you want to put parameters around that, but ultimately it's not a zoning code, so you might not reflect the specifics of that, okay? So those are two really good examples to think about what the master plan does do and what it doesn't do, okay? As we start talking about some of those details. We can go to the next slide. So last time we talked a little bit about the community input and more focused on what we did, when we did it, maybe how we did it. So now I'd like to just take a little bit of time and kind of editorialize, I guess, some of the public input and kind of share what we got out of that as a consultant group and what we hope you all can get out of that as well, okay? So there's a couple of key things. The first are, what are the got-tos? So there were a number of places, both in the themes that we presented the last time, that's at the very highest level, but also as we moved into details, say in open house number 3 and the fall open house around the primary parcels and the key parcels, that there were some overwhelming consensus-based things. Those became got-tos, and when you see the chapter in the implementation plan around the key parcels, you'll see those got-tos. We'll use Jadwin-Stott as an example. Preserving the floodplain, okay? Preserving the river open space. Making sure that there were connections through that property that completed some of the loops around the river and through town, okay? Those are got-tos, and they've been described as got-tos in the master plan. So if someone comes in and they say, this is a communication plan, they know they have to do those things if they want to pursue something on that property. Now, we'll kind of keep along that line and say it's that property that we continue to talk about. Our community input definitely reinforced the fact of this like 51-49 split that I call Basalt. Okay, so that means there are a lot of things in Basalt where you have a community that's kind of split down the middle. I would like to see no babies on the street. I would like to see more babies on the street. And it would literally be your 50-50 split, okay? And so in that, you'll see that. You can see it in the public input. You can see it on some of the parameters we put around, say, land use on some of those key parcels. And you can see where now that is that tension, right? That is good tension and good dialogue in Basalt. But it is reinforced by the community input that we heard. So then if we go, that's the middle of your bell curve, right? Where there's a lot to kind of wrestle with and you have to put parameters on things. Well, then if we look at the other ends of the bell curve, we listened really carefully last time when the question was brought up, you know, did we ask the null question? Did we ask the do you support no growth or very, very limited growth or things like that? So we went back, we really dug into the appendix, we evaluated not only the questions that we asked, specifically if it was say a check the box question, but then also how many opportunities were provided for a more open-ended perspective for that. And so I think in that, it was really interesting as we evaluated that. And there are definitely comments, right, on the end of the bell curve that somebody might say, go nuts, put everything that you can. Here's that tiny little portion of the bell curve. And then I want to stop everything in its tracks. And that was the other end of the bell curve. So this idea of like no growth whatsoever was very, very limited. And actually, we can go to the next slide. Both in our open houses where we asked open-ended questions where someone could go ahead and give that feedback, and then in the ones where we asked, so this was in the survey, and we asked the distinct question. Basalt is currently experiencing, and it was the right amount of growth, too much growth, way too much growth, not enough growth. And so our split between the right amount or not enough was 61.9, and too much to way too much was 38.1. And then the next question said, so if we were to grow, where would it be? And you can see where people voted. Now again, this was just one of our input channels. When we looked, if you go back a slide for a second, when you looked at how many times when people had any open-ended version to kind of give a response that said, I want no or slow or very, very limited, that was the number of times kind of mentioned, and several of those were out of the Pitkin-Basalt Junction area, so between Roaring Fork Club and Old Snowmass. So I think for us, it didn't necessarily rise to the top as this very concrete comment, but rather, if you look back at our themes, so jump ahead 2 slides for me, James. If you look to our themes, I think the comments that we received from the community were just more nuanced in terms of growth, okay? So sometimes it was about limiting, but it was really about limiting it in some really specific areas. And other times it was about how do we foster some of the growth in the places where we do want it, where we want some of that old town vitality, right? Where we want to do something with a pan and fork. And so those were definitely these places where it was like a more nuanced view of growth. And so we kind of wanted to kind of bring that up just as far as you dig in. You're going to see you have the typical kind of hard 50-50 split on a lot of the nuanced issues around how much and where and how do we incentivize. But I think the end of the bell curve did not necessarily rise to the top out of our public input. So I think that's pretty much all I have.
Okay,
Right?
Dave?
Next slide is, yep, that's it. So any questions on that? Do we want to do any?
Yeah, I honestly think that we should hold.
Get through
caution,
everything?
we should-
Okay.
Because I really promised the group that they could talk.
All right,
So-
perfect.
So Dave's gonna be fast.
Yes, very fast. Hi, everyone. Dave from Cushing Terrell. Just a couple minutes on a couple of things we think are important to reinforce tonight. So you see on the screen, this is directly from the document. This is the vision statement. And really what we wanted to do is start with a really clear, concise, brief statement to really kind of guide everything that happens in this plan. This permeates itself throughout the plan. It informs the goals and objectives and the projects and everything else. Obviously, it came from a lot of public input, a lot of stakeholder input, one-on-one interviews. And you can see some of the visioning, inspiration, and ideas that were expressed from the public and the stakeholders. We kind of pointed those out as emblematic of what we were hearing and how it inspired this vision statement. But we also looked at a lot of what was in the strategic work plan. And if you look at the words, we looked carefully at the words of the vision statement for the town and the vision statement and some of the visioning and mission statements in the work plan. And we looked at every word and kind of incorporated it into this. So I think it's important to read this and see how this really does trickle through everything else in the plan. And it was important to look at all the inputs that we had. Next slide, James. Okay, last time we brought up some tables and some numbers, but I think after that, the team worked pretty hard to really kind of simplify the message about what does the plan, what's the map say, what do the key parcels say. And this is what we're calling baseline information. So this is your take home. These top 3 bullets here, these are your take homes from what the plan actually says for some of the growth comparisons. So number 1, the key components of the future land use map have pretty much remained constant for a number of years. Since 07 and going back to 99, a lot of the parcels are still the same. A lot of the land uses are still the same. So it's consistency there. In the 2020 plan, the future land use map, it does show fewer units in town and within the UGB than the 2007 plan, which you can see pretty much in all categories of those numbers. The bottom row is the 2020 plan. The last really important thing that maybe wasn't super clear last time was that the amount of approved and unbuilt units in town has been decreased substantially, and these are projects like Sopris Meadows that have been approved, but they just haven't been built out yet. So that number has gone down from 593 in 07 to 209 in the 2020 plan. So that's kind of important. That's a really good indicator of your capacity. And total overall, the units are down from 2020. So go to the next slide, James, please. There's also some questions about growth rate and absorption. So we looked at some of the figures going back about 20 years. This goes back to 2001. Obviously, it's going to take time to build any amount of units. So we kind of wanted to see going back however far we could go. This is housing units. And you could see some highs. You could see some 6%. You could see some lows, almost no growth and almost decline, 0.1%. But any way you cut it, the average growth rates, 6-year, 10-year, 18-year, it's pretty consistent, pretty steady, and it's pretty slow or moderate, 3 even going back, I think an important thing here, the 10-year average from 2009 to 2018, which is the most recent number, is 2.1%. And the important thing about that is that's in the framework of the 2007 plan. So in that framework, even with the capacity that that plan showed, which we've just showed you, it was more than the 2020 plan has capacity for. The growth rate was still 2.1%, so obviously it's going to take a while for absorption to occur. Next slide, please. So last time I went through the primary and key parcels. We talked a little bit about how the public input process worked and that the back and forth at the open houses was like, and how we received and disseminated information and tested some of these development outcomes and scenarios with the public. So I won't go through too much detail with that, but just a reminder that we did test some of these things. Next slide, James. And we did have some voting from the public. This is just from the public. This is the overall results from our scenarios that we did address to the public. But I think I just want to leave this up here for a second. And at this point, I think we want to have let planning and zoning have an opportunity to address some of the preferred outcomes that came from the planning and zoning work sessions and some of that process.
So, we only have 3 members of the P&Z today. We're missing, Joan Keefe, Tracy Bennett, Gino Rossetti, and Eric Volzek. They're out of town, and half of them are in someplace warm. So I'm gonna go, so, we have Bill Marin, Bernie Grauer, and Rob Levitt here. And what the purpose of this portion of the meeting is really for the P&Z to set the framework of what they did with the public information. And just so you know, Bill, the next slides on here are each of the primary parcels, so if you want to zero in on any, and I'm going to turn it over to you a little bit.
Okay, I think I might speak about one of them, but
Yeah.
for the most part, I just want to, I'm going to keep my comments more at 30,000 feet about what we did and how we saw what we were doing. I think first off, I wanted to talk about, the very first I want to talk about the public process. This public process was very, very different than we've done in the past. If you look at what we did in 99 through 07 and 20, and I was involved in all of these, I think that in 2007 was quite a comprehensive jump over 99 for the public process. The public process in 99 was essentially, we mailed out cards to people and wanted to know what they thought. And that sort of got much more involved with some meetings and community outreach in 07. This time, this was an order of magnitude above what we had done before. And the majority of what we spent, and this is a big deal for us. We spent a fair amount of budget on this, and this is a departure from what we've done in the past because we wanted to make sure that where we were going really reflected the public sentiment. There was a sense that what we were doing before was based upon just a few vocal individuals who just happened to come to our meetings. But this was an exhaustive process, and the community was involved in many, many different ways, more so than just the meetings. There were, in-house meetings, face-to-face meetings. There was invited meetings. It was all flavor that CTA had and Connect One had done. And so we, as a commission, felt very comfortable that we were getting a real cross-section of what the actual sentiment was. And then a lot of it was then tested out later as we sort of developed the things we would talk about. Where we wound up has a very strong majority in the commission. There is some dissent, but for the most part, it's 6-1 for the product we have in front of us being a real reflection of how we thought and how we felt it applied to the community sense of where we were going and where we wanted to go as a town. I want to talk about the parcels themselves. I think the results you see in the plan for the parcels were for the most part in conformance with what we saw as the public input. There was one place where we varied a little bit, and that was Jadwin Stotts, and we did it for a very specific reason. We did it because that one parcel was so open to transit and so close to a BRT stop and so accessible to downtown. And one thing that struck me when I took a break from the planning commission and was working for the town and running our town planning process. And the thing that came up for me in that mostly was that there was a very strong cohort of people 30 and under who felt very, very strongly that they wanted to live in smaller units, car-free, downtown, walk to services. That was a surprise to me. That was a real big surprise. And then my daughter comes home from college and wants to do the same thing after living in my basement. And I think, wow, I really want to provide that so we can get her out of my basement. But nonetheless, I think, that was the one instance where we really varied, just a little bit. We sort of put a little pressure on it. But for the most part, all of our results were very, very consistent with the way the community felt. And so we felt very, very comfortable with that. I think, we started this process wanting a visionary plan. And we've got a strong amount of vision, but we as boards and commissions need to put a little spin on that. This is our plan. And I think we need to really, we're the people who make decisions at the moment on what actually happens. And for us as a planning commission, this one document is the one thing that really helps us a lot. And a lot of times more so than code, because code speaks to very, very granular parts. But sometimes we need to make decisions on not granular parts, on the bigger picture, and step outside of that for a moment. Jadwin Stotts is an exemplar of that. There was an application that came by on that, and parts of the commission didn't feel that it was consistent with what our master plan spoke to. And it really aided us in that. That's just one example. But I think to get back to the visionary part, I think this is where we as two boards, a board and a commission, will kind of add that in. I think we need to put our stamp on it above and beyond, we have to figure out how we get there just a little bit. And that's what I think our job is. And, we just have to send a little direction to the data. And with that, I'm going to let Bernie speak a little bit, his thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah, I just want to respond to some criticism we heard at the last meeting that some people seem to feel that we took this lightly because we used balloons, poker chips, many ways of outreaching and enlivening the community engagement. And I think that was very well planned out because it's a pretty dry subject. And I agree with Bill that we had more outreach, more community involvement at a greater depth, maybe not as much breadth, but more depth than ever before, and that we all took this process very seriously indeed. And some of the critics have said that, they want a property they want to develop, that it's not a game to them, this is our home, and these are our lives and our future. Well, I can tell you, I and everybody on the Planning Commission feel that same way about the overall well-being and mobility and where it makes sense to have growth, and we take it very seriously. We got a lot of experience. I've been on the Planning Commission 8 years, City Council 1 term. Bill Marin, been on forever. Rob has been on Council and Planning Commission. We are embedded members of Tracy Bennett. We are embedded members of the community. What we got from the public process is not the end of it. We took our interactions, our experience, our history, and we reviewed that information from that very exhaustive and professionally carried out community engagement process, and we used our minds and our experience, life experience and living here to come up what we think is a good master plan that permits growth. It doesn't demand it. Now, We know it's very important because both developers and the town council or the P&Z will rely on the master plan when they're arguing the merits of a development. So it certainly is very important for development, but we are trying to look at what would it take to accommodate certain kinds of growth in certain places. I would say we were mostly successful. I think we fell down, or we didn't really look far enough in one major area, and that is vehicular mobility. And I'm looking at page 29, the master planning implications, which I'd like to have it retitled Traffic, Parking, and Congestion, just to make it crystal clear, because that is a critical issue that you talk to people. An emotional issue is congestion, pollution, the downside of urban density. And we've got to reach a reasonable balance. But I think way too much time was spent on non-vehicular mobility. There's half a page, can encourage non-vehicular movement, construct South Side underpass, $20–30 million project. What I would like to see us restate this section to say that consideration of vehicular mobility and its impact on the well-being and lifestyle of the community members will be one of the prime considerations, and how these parcels impact one another. And so I would like much more emphasis on that, and a commitment as development happens that this will want to be one of the key determinants in evaluating projects. What is this impact? But I have changed very dramatically on one parcel. In general, I think it was a very serious, very competent job, and I support the general thrust of the plan we're presenting to you.
Thank you, Bernie. Rob?
James, can we get back to the slide with the 4 major parcels on it? I had to promise that I wouldn't say anything that I hadn't been saying for 6 months. The top line here on the front page says density over sprawl. The question was, which do you prefer, density or urban sprawl? Didn't say, what about small, tasteful development? Or what do you think about sustainable environmental growth? Where would people have weighed in if those were one of the choices? If you look, Southside, Jadwin, and Myers, A was always the smaller development. 55 to 45, 60 to 40, and 65 to 35. That's a landslide in our day and age for the smaller proposals. And I just wonder if there had been a third option where people would have gone. I think if we kept this at 30,000 feet and said, we think Jadwin's a great place for density, then everyone's in supportive. It's when we start talking about numbers that things get complicated and messy. So, as far as I think about the master plan, density here, less dense here, great, we're all in agreement. But when you start getting the numbers is when it's going to get really tricky and we get caught in the weeds. And who knows in 10 years what numbers we pick tonight are going to be appropriate. So I just question getting that specific at this point. That's all I got.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why don't you just pull back to the parcel map, James? Go ahead, Bill, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. I think right now, we've kind of given you guys a sense of how we felt about where we were coming. I started up high, and we got more detailed as we went along. But I think at this point, this is where we come together, and we really need to hear your guys' thoughts about what we were talking about and what this is talking about in order to really move this forward.
Well,
we can zero in on, we just chose not to go through every parcel, but we have, information on the key parcels and the primary parcels. So if you want to zero in on those, and then later I would, like to give a little update on what we've been doing with the Myers property and maybe talk a little bit about the Forest Service property. If
Okay.
we don't cover those naturally, so.
Well,
One
I'll
thing,
just-
before we start though, I think we should stay kind of, we should stay at a higher level than the numbers per se. We should just talk about, our overall feelings about it, so we can really kind of, hone down into it and get down to the numbers soon.
I'll just briefly intro and try to kind of recap what I remember from last time, and that was that a number of counselors were concerned about the amount of growth. That even though it's projected less than it was in the past, I think there's still some concerns, and I think part of it is that for me, and I think for maybe some others, the whole idea that we no longer believe that we can keep going like we have in the past for a number of reasons. Number one, the climate issue. Number two, or tied for number one, the traffic and congestion issue, because we don't address traffic and congestion ever, not anywhere in this valley. We just assume it'll be absorbed. And I think that Bernie has hit on something that, even if we don't do it regionally, and we talked at the climate summit the other night, that you have to do it regionally. You have to do address the climate issues and traffic issues regionally. So that is probably more like 100,000 feet, but that is a huge concern for all of us. And I mean, the way that master planning goes and the way that planning goes in general is you're not planning to do nothing, you're planning to do more and more, and we are not integrating the climate issues in these plans at all. And so we're basically doing it the same way we've done it for 50 years, and I think we need to do it differently.
I'm just wondering, from the master plan planning side of it, where do you guys look at capacity? So capacity for our schools, capacity for our water district, capacity for our roads. If you build all that in Southside, there's still only one exit out of Southside, unless you have to build the underpass, which is $25 to $30 million, which I don't think a lot of people have taste for right now, or ever. And so I wonder, we can say, oh, these properties are great for density, but how much true density can we support as a town? Where do these, where are the jobs gonna come from? Where are the kids gonna go to school? Where are the kids gonna go to daycare? If we already have some of these problems, traffic, I just wonder where.
I think when you look at sort of that issue of capacity, there are some broad brushstroke capacity questions you can ask. And I think we've heard that in public meetings before. Can Highway 82 take more cars? Yes, is the answer to the question if you ask CDOT. I think each development proposal gets reviewed by our partner agencies. So it goes to the school district, and then they look at the number of students it would generate, and they, will ask for, there's impact fees associated with development that help to offset some of the, additional costs. There's land set aside out by Blue Lake, for example, for an additional school, should the, population grow to that level. As it relates to, your example of traffic on the south side, I think the idea in this plan was that there's somewhat of a spectrum of options, and it's going to be dependent on what that particular development may or may not trigger. If it triggers an underpass, well, I'm pretty sure that if one developer comes in, if it is $30 million, since we're throwing around that number, that doesn't make sense when you're putting in, 40 units and, a couple thousand square feet of commercial space. So I think, that those kind of things are looked at on that basis. As it relates to jobs, where are these people gonna come from? I think that's kind of what this plan aims to do, on the south side, is create that space, open up that idea for job creation. I think in other places I've worked, you strive for having people show up with plans for commercial development. Here, we've actually seen it. Aspen Ski Co. has moved here. You know, CCY Architects has moved here. You know, we have two great examples over here across the way in RMI and the River Conservancy. You know, those are job creators. And so I think that we have an opportunity, and we're rewriting sort of our future to not be a bedroom community, but to stand on our own. You've got to have places for that job creation. So I think just coming back to your original question on capacity, you know, I think that there's some level of capacity that we can speak to in this. But, you know, I think a lot of times it's more appropriately handled on that project by project basis to get real, you know, firm numbers on that. And so hopefully that addresses that, and these guys might have something else to expand on, but.
Gary, then Jim, but just really quickly, I just want to throw out there that it sounds so doable. I'm just following up with what you're saying, but I remember going to meeting after meeting at the Tree Farm Ace Lanes project and having proven that yes, there's capacity. Yes, there's capacity for water. There's capacity for the cars. There's capacity for schools. There's capacity for everything. And yet, get real. We already hear from everybody who has to commute that they can't get through the Mid-Valley, that we are already choking to death. And we're gonna build another well. It's on the other side of the highway, and we can accommodate that. There's capacity for that. That's a crock. It is a complete crock. There is not unlimited capacity, and you can't take it application by application. It will not work. Okay, Gary, Jen.
Could I just have one
Sure.
quick follow-up? And I just asked this because this all started, you know, one of the first major projects that got me involved in this was on half of the Jadwin Stop project was an RV park. And the quote was, well, if two RVs back up the traffic on that road, it's gonna be a huge problem. And now you're showing 166 units in that same area. So what, how do we go from two RVs causing a problem, and I get it's transit oriented, and I get we're gonna have limited cars, but this is America, people drive cars, you can see it on 82 every day, and I just wonder, so sometimes I think we look at this and say it's gonna be this miracle, and I just don't understand how we can go from two RVs causing a traffic jam to 160 dense units and thinking that everyone's gonna walk. And it's a broad stroke, and I know there's better answers, but it's just puzzling to me.
Thanks, Ryan. Gary, then Jen.
Well, and it's also, to me, you know, I just want to go on Ryan's thing, 'cause capacity is a big deal. It's a quality of life issue for the people who live here. And so CDOT can tell you, yes, there's capacity on a road, there's capacity at the south side intersection and stuff. The reality is, you know, it takes time for people to realize the impacts of development, you know. You can talk about what Ace Lane and Tree Farm's gonna do, but until you see it, you don't necessarily know how much it's gonna truly impact your quality of life. I don't care if they consider it a D or an F or an A on traffic. It's really about your experience here, and this is what we've got to represent for the public. And so what I worry about is the capacity issue. Is the schools always look at it and they'll find a way to give an impact fee and all this stuff. In the end, they had to do a $120 million bond to build more schools. And so to increase the capacity of schools throughout, you know, areas that are growing more heavily than we're Basalt, like in Glenwood. And so they had to build a whole new one. And so are we gonna keep that, you know, kind of trajectory going with this and not address it? And I really, you know, overall, you know, this is definitely a much better master plan than what we have done in the past. I do believe that we have reached out to the community, and this is not a subject that a ton of people want to come to, because it's not like saying we're going to put a big fat development there, it's going to happen tomorrow, and then you get tons of people showing up. this is kind of what you see in your future. So, you know, I really was looking forward to finding ways to really say what our vision is, and I think we say that really well, but then put it into some action steps. And one of the action steps is really trying to find ways to infill and density. We heard that clearly. And, you know, the reality is I think people are concerned about the amount of growth. I'm concerned about the amount of growth because I deal with it. I work in county government, and we see the impact. We see we have to build more trailheads for people because there's more people here. We got to build more trails. There's got to be a point where that capacity is looked at. And as a town of Basalt, I feel that we should be giving that sustainability and the vision of sustainability and really trying to find ways to make it transit-oriented. And I take Ryan's point is that, you know, the reality is some of this too much in certain areas, and could it be scaled back a little bit? But the reality for me is I like the density piece in town. I like that we try to find ways to incentivize that because it is next to transit. It is in areas that already have development. It could be areas that we want to see redeveloped. And so, you know, in the way I look at our future land use map as a way to really advertise where we want to see development, and we should prioritize, you know, for me is just trying to go inside. And I can get more specific on others if I want others to talk. I just, when you brought up the capacity issue, you know, we're dealing with childcare. They might have to go for another funding tax to really get childcare, affordable housing. And there's a point where how much can the community sustain? And I do agree. I love the master plan that says live, work. I do believe that we need to provide some of that here. And I'm not saying there's no growth. I'm just saying where we put that growth is critically important.
So Gary did a fantastic job of synthesizing and moving towards this phrase that I'm really thinking about and is a major part of my my platform for re-election is community sustainability. We talk about environmental sustainability. We talk about financial sustainability. And what we are really grappling with here is community sustainability. And that is reflected in our urban growth boundary, considering where development does go and how it does affect all of your daily experience. And one of the points that Jackie had of, hey, we've done it one way for 50 years and look at where we're at. We need to reconsider how we're doing it right now, because this is thinking, and another phrase that I have is we need to get out of yesterday to be in today to think about tomorrow. And this is what we are here doing, is thinking about tomorrow. And where we are today, we have so much, in my last 4 years of council, we have approved so much development that is unbuilt. And that is really going to affect us into the future. And we have very much focused on infill type of development. The one that strayed from that is in the south side with the joint partnership between Habitat, Pitkin County, Town of Basalt. And that is an example that merits being able to fudge with our urban growth boundary. It's a net zero affordable, 100% net zero, 100% affordable project. That right there is just phenomenal, and that's acceptable in my book. When we start looking at the infill projects, we need to be, I agree, very transit aware of where are these people going to drive, get in and off of Highway 82, and as well looking at some areas that are tremendous acreage, and one intersection on the south side of town that, or not south side, but on Two Rivers Road, the access onto Highway 82 there, that could turn into an absolute nightmare with having a large number of residences there, looking at the number of people that are going to be going in and out of there. As well, looking at what the basis of our master plan and where it is coming from. We are in the process of doing it, and no process is perfect. What I would like to see on this is transit study. I would like to see some influence by the RAFTA study that has been done and their transportation of where people are, and then as well the housing study. None of these phenomenal huge studies that have been completed are mentioned or that I've noticed in the master plan. And we've spent good money on them, and they have incredible data. We need to be in the year 2019 and not doing it how we did in the last 50 years. And let's utilize the studies that we do have and the data that we do have to plan well for our future community sustainability.
Down here.
Well, I'm kind of just letting this all like wash over me, all of your comments, because I agree with everything that has been said. And what I think of is the night of the Lake Christine fire. And that night, talking to people who lived in the community, people who are new to the community, people literally did not know where to go. We know there's one road. And the big question was, do I go to Aspen, is that where I'm safe? Or do I go to Carbondale, is that where I'm safe? On one road, with the number of people that we have right now. And I remember being on Highway 82, stuck at the Catherine store light on July 4th, with traffic everywhere. The roads were packed, and we were having an Armageddon in our backyard, an unexpected Armageddon. So we can keep talking about how there's enough water, which, as we all know, water, daycare, natural resources, on and on. We can say we have capacity, but when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, we have one road, and we're talking about tripling our population. We know that these life safety issues are going to continue because of climate and because of additional people. So when I look at that map, the only thing that rationally makes sense to like have density on is Clark's. Nothing else really makes sense. Maybe Southside, but the underpass is pie in the sky. So there's that, because I can't look at a master plan, and I know we're supposed to, and I appreciate that it is a document that P&Z needs to use, and developers need to use, and council needs to use, and staff needs to use to determine where and how we want our community to grow. I just think we need to talk about, should our community keep growing? I think that we're in a world that's turned completely upside down. The way we have thought, the way we have developed, it doesn't make sense anymore. And the other voice that is never heard in any conversation, and that is the impact that our development has on wildlife, and that we are decimating local populations. And it's because we have all this disjointed development, and it just keeps going and going and going. And so from like a sustainability perspective, Clark's, that's all we should do, and it should be done. I mean, that's the harsh reality in my opinion.
Happy to go clean up.
So let me ask a dumb question. Sorry about this. This plan, it's got option A, option B, and it's got a future land use map. Does it stay like that, or do we then take this another iteration and say we prefer X? Or is the future land use map what we're trying to get to consensus on?
The primary parcels, each one of them say what the preferred option is. And so on every one of them, at Southside it's A, and there's a huge message. We've done a lot of traffic studies in Southside. So basically we're kind of saying, you know, you need to do a.
So-
So there is.
So
And
that
the
other
Clark-
option is in there, why then? Why is the other option
You
in
could
there?
take it out, but it was just background, you know, and if there
Okay.
is an underpass, and we can revisit what the land uses are. So it's background and explanation of how we got there. On Clark's, we left all three options because
'Cause it's so
option
open,
C,
yeah. Okay.
it's so it's
Okay.
so open. And that's up to the council if they wanna, like, the P and Z on Jadwin, they made a hybrid option, which is option C, which they had up on the wall, which gave more open space but kept the higher number of units, so at
Got it.
100 units.
Okay, that's helpful. So, I think one issue that is glaring is this Eagle County collaboration problem with the comprehensive plan and how we work with them. And I feel like, you know, if you talk to Eagle County planners, they say, and I'm friends with them, they're good people, they say, we put growth, this is the tree farm, right where the master plan, the comprehensive plan said it should be. It's on mass transit, it's perfect. And obviously, I and the rest of us had a different perspective on that based on traffic, but the lack of communication there, I think a piece of it was maybe out of frustration with Basalt not approving anything and saying, screw it, we're gonna approve this, because that happened when we were messing around with Stotts. Regardless of whether that's true or not, that's something we're gonna have to grapple with, and it's critical. Second point is, you know, I think this master plan is a climate plan because, you know, we don't really have a choice of saying, oh, too much growth, we're gonna stop. It's really, if your position is no growth, you can describe it as growth or destroy the community by traffic. So that it's, do you destroy the community by building a bunch of stuff or do you destroy it with traffic from people coming down Valley? If there are 600 more jobs in Aspen than we can house, those people are gonna get to Aspen somehow. So the reason I think this is a response to climate is, hey, where should the density be? It should be right in the center of town. Everyone here agrees Clark should be super dense. So we know that and it's great, and that's the only thing we'll have unanimity on. But then if I look at that primary parcel list, then I look at Jadwin and I say, yeah, that's an appropriate place for density. There's a reason the majority of P&Z said put it there. It's on transit, it's in the center of town, there's walkability. And then I think as you get further out, I can better understand the thoughts people have expressed here, which is, yeah, South Side may be limited by infrastructure. There may be safety issues and so forth, so perhaps you want to err on the side of less, but that's good urban planning. It's density in the core and less moving out. So to me, this does recognize, you know, the imperatives of climate. It seems like good urban planning. It follows smart principles, and it makes total sense to me. I mean, I think we could mess around with how much density is the further out you get from the town core, but at least for several of these parcels, it just seems right to me.
Bill?
Yes, I'll go, you know, kind of echo a riff that we've heard, and I guess from your 1 out of 7, but I still do feel like the variety of engagements that I participated in presented me with dense and more dense options. I didn't have a less dense option, and the outcome is a variety of densities that presume certain things about our public investment, such as the underpass, or it assumes the constraints that Ryan talked about, just being schools, water, waste management, that, again, I think are going to be binding constraints that will prohibit certain of these suggestions for the 4 principal parcels. I guess I would turn it around too and just ask several questions, because I am a little bit interested and concerned that we bring others into this discussion, if only for their input, if not for, again, I would like to know that we have caucused or at least circulated this document with Eagle County, because what Eagle does is material to what Basalt does and vice versa, as we know. And again, I think it's part of kind of improving a relationship with a county that is material to our interest, and same with Garfield and Pitkin. And I would also argue that it's worth determining how the other towns, particularly Carbondale, but perhaps Snowmass as well, are looking at their own future, because these things are interrelated and codependent. So that would be the question: what have we done to engage with some of these surrounding jurisdictions that do have an interest?
Do you want us to answer that real quick?
I'll
I
take all the
suppose so.
questions. and
I mean, I was
Okay.
gonna say,
Okay.
I'd prefer to, hold the questions. The other, I mean, again, we talked about, about considering these preferred options, but I wonder whose options these are preferred for. And what I'm getting at is, we've made assumptions about the allocation or density, the development that will occur on private lands. And I sure hope that we've consulted with the private landowners who have a very direct and material interest in what is being proposed. And again, this is relevant to the 4 principal parcels, but I would also argue that in the case of CDC, or not CDC, Clark's, sorry, it may be a logical place for density, but the highest density solution is going to be a very, very expensive solution. And if that is not within the realm of consideration of a private developer, perhaps we need to solicit expressions of interest from a private developer before presenting this as a reasonable option. I also don't understand the relationship of Basalt to the decisions we are by definition inferring for communities within our urban growth boundary and communities that are within our planning, the 3-mile planning area. Because the 3-mile planning area clearly extends well into Garfield County. And it kind of strikes me that we are projecting our own desires based upon what we have defined as our 3-mile planning area. And I have to wonder whether Garfield agrees that that is our manageable interest or whether it is not. And conscious too that there are islands, enclaves if you will, of unincorporated Eagle within Basalt. And this is Aspen Basalt Trailer, the Homestead Park, the Valero Park. Again, I wonder what we are presupposing and what we know about the future development of those parcels, because in the absence of that knowledge, I find it, kind of incomplete. But I guess I'd finish just by asking, I think we're all very interested to see this process come to closure. I think it is a very, very good document that does represent an awful lot of thought, but we've been working with the prior master plan for 13 years. I'm not sure that I feel any great sense of urgency to ratify this in the next 4 meetings that this council will share, and deny the courtesy to an incoming council. So I, either as a matter of practical reality or because we may not have all of these questions answered by the 2nd meeting of March, I would suggest that we defer approval and adoption of this master plan until the next council is seated and has the courtesy and and I would argue it is because they have the responsibility to defend this and implement this that I would feel far more comfortable if the incoming council had the prerogative to approve and that we not rush forward to adopt.
Gary?
Some of the things, I just wanted to add to, where I'm at to give you direction on what I think about the properties and stuff. I, first of all, believe that since this council sat through and did the entire process, that this council should be the one to adopt this plan. It will take a really long time to get the next council totally 100% up to speed on everything for them to participate. I've been part of a lot of major planning processes in the past, and it's more fair to do it with the people that have sat through it, have listened to it, have participated, have actually initiated, and I feel that we can get this done. And so from my perspective, I really look at, adding plan elements to our plan that really speak to some of the stuff that people brought up. I mean, the Eagle County thing is a great example. There should be a plan element about, intergovernmental collaboration. I mean, I really believe that we should have a plan element for that, because I've seen, Basalt needs to have their vision, and they put their vision outside their boundaries, and I'm okay with that. It's just that I don't feel, with Picken, it's been pretty easy. They have their pretty strict development, and if you want more, you have to come to the town. Where Eagle has been a completely different relationship, and we're not there yet with them. And I think if we would say that in our plan and say intergovernmental collaboration is a goal and an absolute piece of the element that we need to do, it really would set the stage for us and the next council and everybody else, and really send a message to Eagle County and to Garfield, because the 3 mile, Bill pointed out, the 3 mile goes into Garfield. I don't know where we'll go with that, but at least it sets that in stone to really say that's one of our visions, is intergovernmental collaboration, that we want to do it. And I think we should put it in the master plan as a plan element. That's just a thought of mine. And the other piece was, maybe it's timing of growth is one of the pieces that we should be looking at too. Because if, I look at it going, oh my God, if all of those parcels came in at one time to develop all at once, it's gonna be a kind of a nightmare. And it's even some of the stuff I am happy to see develop, like Clark's, but if Clark's and Jadwin and Stott and parts of Southside all came in, that's a lot for this community to do it. So I don't know how that would happen, but I look at a timing of growth as a piece of this plan, because that shows that we want to continue the slow growth. And I know in 2007 we tried to come up with a growth limit, and that was a brutal exercise. Bill was there. Remember, we tried to come up with a growth number limit, and I'm not proposing that at all. I'm not.
It was a timing thing too.
Well, but to me, timing is how we, like when developments come in, how we time them to be more sustainable on all the resources and everything like that. I do not want to go into trying to say Basalt will only grow at 4.1%. I forgot the number we picked at that time, but it was a brutal exercise in that. And so, I want to be very clear with that, and I want to be visionary and really talk about, how we can collaborate with other governments, maybe look at the timing of growth, and really truly, I look at it too is, a lot of people were, when they had to choose between one option and the other, I see what option they chose, and I totally appreciate the P&Z going, okay, we're gonna take all these elements and try to put them together. But I just, looking at it maybe as a way to say, we should stick with the lower rate, and maybe find ways to tweak that, because I'll say on Jadwin Stott, it is a transit-oriented development for me, and it is kind of in the middle of town, and I'm not necessarily, opposed to some level of development there. I do love the community facility potential idea there, because that's a great place to move town hall and maybe the police together, or recreation department, or something else that we can do there. I do like that because it still stays kind of within town. I just look at when you start moving out into Jadwin and everything else, the amount of development there is gonna be large, and Ryan is correct that we were talking about what the impacts of that road would be when we had a mobile home park, and what the impact of that road would be if we did that. And I wanna worry, I do worry about that, so.
Jen, but I just want to quickly say something. We talked about the old growth, the attempt at limiting growth, but one of the things that, I haven't heard about since the 70s is the whole concept of exponential growth, and that even if you have a 3.5% growth rate, you double every 20 years. Double every 20 years. I don't know where that leaves your kids. I don't have any kids, but some place where you can't move at all, because even if we went electric in every house and in every car, that would not eliminate the congestion that we would see. And it comes back to, whether it was Ryan or Gary, the whole issue of quality of life. And if we could just put that at the very top, at the whole issue of quality of life. And the other thing is that Rocky Mountain Institute used to say, I read a book once that said, you can have economic growth without having population growth. So why are we still doing it the same goddamn way? You gotta have more growth, you gotta have more growth, you gotta have more growth. Why are we still doing that? Jen, tell me that answer.
Well, I can't answer that one, Jackie, but I will. It's a very valid question and a very valid point. And in the year 2020, it seems like something that we should be able to answer. I agree with you on that. I do as well wholeheartedly agree with Gary's points that that this council has put blood, sweat, and tears into this master plan, and we should be the ones to approve it. Looking at intergovernmental agreements and including Eagle County and Pitkin County, I'm very supportive of that, and that's something that I have a question that I'd like to see in the future of our discussions of that being brought back to us of, will there be a referral period for, are other governments allowed?
I'll answer all that at the end.
Okay, great. And sorry, Jackie, my brain just went. Okay, that's it, because I forgot my train of thought and I didn't write it down.
Anyone want to add?
In Jackie's absence, Susan had some answers to some of.
Well,
Yes.
it's Susan, if you want to do it. Unless somebody else has something else to add.
Oh, I do. I remember now. Can I? Okay, real quick. And then please fill us in. I know that discuss schedule is on the future, but I'm there with Auden of saying dumb question, but I think it's important for the community and for us to know the process. Are we married to these key and primary key parcels and keeping this in the plan? How does that look? How can we, what's our arts and crafts box like?
Okay, I don't know that I can answer the arts and crafts question, but maybe just to frame it, because the real question is, can we get there, right? So let's turn to the schedule. James, is like the last slide. Not the absolute last slide. That will confuse people, so just go.
We're frozen at the moment, so.
Are you too far? There we are. Okay, so we've had conversations with, a lot of conversations with Pitkin and Eagle County. We had a special study area, remember, with Pitkin County, the PBJ study area. An upshot of that is that Pitkin County's taking the information and they're going to continue and complete that process. We've had conversations with Eagle County. We have a meeting with them, with their staff tomorrow. And one of the things that we're doing with this master plan, but keep in mind that in Basalt, the master plan is different. Because in most jurisdictions, only the P&Z adopts the master plan. So in Eagle County, Pitkin County, Carbondale, only the P&Z adopts the plan, and you don't have the town council. So what we are doing is we're meeting with the P&Z, our P&Z is meeting with P&Z for Eagle County next Tuesday. And we're going over the plan, going over the Eagle County UTB, how we're dealing with that, dealing with the Forest Service properties, how we deal with our IGAs. They're referenced in our goals and objectives. Can they be beat? Yes. And then on the 18th of February, we're meeting with Pickens County P&Z. And we've actually never met with Pickens County P&Z. We've met before our P&Z long time ago with the Eagle County P&Z, but we've never met with Pickens. So we're having that meeting. We have a meeting, although we've had conversations with Pickens County, we're having a meeting on Friday with their staff. We are officially still in the referral process, and our comments are due, I think Monday is coming. Monday is when the referral period ends, but technically, since we're still getting, we're gonna be meeting with Eagle County and Pickens County, we're expecting those afterwards. We're meeting, going over the plan with CPW. We have a special section that you saw, like Christine, that kind of went with your work program. A number of references about CPW. We're meeting with their staff Thursday. So this schedule, we kind of laid out every 2 weeks, meeting with you, kind of throwing on this calendar, just so you know you get the real world. We have the River Park development. So next meeting, which is February 11th and February 25th, we have the River Park. We expect the first meeting, we have the River Park, quite a bit of discussion. So we thought at the next meeting with this group, where we would kind of outline our sustainability chapter and go over that, and maybe high-level goals and objectives, with the idea of a official, public hearing where we're taking public comments on maybe Wednesday, February 26th, which is not a council meeting day. And then we laid out the other Tuesdays, there's not very many, to get us to adopt it before the election. So, we've set this up. The other 2 times that I was involved with the plan, we had the P&Z adopt the plan, then we went to the town council. This time we're gonna have the town council adopt the plan, and then to kind of try to eliminate those asterisks in the plan where we don't agree. So, March 24th was kind of we had the public hearing, the real adoption date, like technically on the 11th, with a follow-up date on March 24th. That might not be a good day, because that is spring break, and I don't know who's gonna be missing at that meeting, and then there's the 31st. And of course, we can have all kinds of special meetings. We're here to do what you want. So in your comments of how are we coordinating, do we have references of updating, reenacting our IGA? We do. Could that language be improved? Maybe in light of the conversations, probably yes. We haven't done as much coordination with Garfield County, to be honest with you. There's a little bit of the 3-mile planning area that's in Garfield County. You're really not talking about that much development. We kind of left that as existing land use. We did use a lot of, it doesn't come across strongly because we took out all the plans and studies, kind of try to take the bulk of those out, and they're in an appendix. But yes, we used a lot of the transit studies and all of that, and the affordable housing study. And I think that was one of the big surprises from my involvement, is just how the public wanted affordable housing. Say one other thing about capacity. I've been involved in planning for a long time, and I have been involved in a lot of really expensive capacity studies and traffic studies, and what's the ultimate capacity study, and they're all extremely expensive. We did one here in Basalt, actually, when we did, in 2004, we did a big thing where we were trying to get development to pay for the river improvements, and so we had a gazillion square feet of development, I mean, it was astronomical. It makes this look like a shadow of nothing. And we had a traffic engineer that said it worked. I've never known a traffic, and I mean, those studies, it's really a quality of life issue. And same with water. We have good water. Sand districts, well, they have I guarantee you that Mid-Valley Metro has a lot of capacity, that they can accommodate a lot of growth. So it's really a quality of life issue, because the standard that a traffic engineer is gonna use is not really what you want. I mean, as a normal citizen of Basalt, if you wanna keep things the same. So I do kind of think that it is, a lot of these parcels that we're dealing with, if you had the key parcel map, they're the same parcels that we had in the 99 plan. And they come in really slowly. I mean, Stotts Mill was in the 99 plan. We approved it, we reapproved it, we approved it, we may reapprove it. Yeah, we may extend it. And so there's these parcels, they really haven't changed. And that's why those maps are up there, just kind of show you that. But if you really want to adopt a plan by the end of the year, at the end of the sitting council, then I think the best plan is to say, what is it that you want the next thing to do? If you can get your arm around, yeah, with these things, I can change or add, I can have these as next steps, and you feel comfortable, then I think that's the way to do it. We're not gonna be able to take on, in 1 month, essentially, we're not gonna be able to change gears. We're not gonna be able to do something that wasn't in our scope, that we've budgeted, that we've hired our consultants to do. So I guess if you can think in those terms of like, what is it that would be the next steps of, maybe it is a different kind of growth management. The growth rate is what concerns me, and I think you could put that kind of framework in the plan.
I have two quick things. First, that whole issue of quality of life and capacity and traffic studies proving anything you want. So the other thing that I never will forget is when Eagle County was putting through their application, I mean, not Eagle County, but Ace Lane, and basically saying, oh yeah, 82 will always accommodate any amount of traffic that you will put on it. But you know why? Because they're gonna stop you from getting on the highway so that 82 can go by. So that is the truth of how you accommodate traffic. You let the state have their road, and you will sit and you will wait. Talk about quality of life. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, I don't remember if it was Ryan and I or somebody, but I think one way we might want to approach this, because I think the plan overall is pretty beautiful. I think it's good. I mean, I didn't agree from the get-go about it being more deep and less broad. I wanted a scientific survey from the very beginning in addition to what was done, just because there are so many thousands of people who just are not on the fringes and are not gonna come to this stuff. And I really wanted to know what they had to say. But I think we might wanna very soon just actually get to the numbers on the parcels, honestly, because Rob is suggesting, we weren't offered nothing. The only thing we can do, barring starting over, spending more money, is really just look at the parcels and say, this is the lowest number that was offered, and we think people may have wanted a lower number. Look at the parcels and kind of guess. Rob and then Bernie.
To use P and Z speak, even Rob says it's okay to have some density on Jadwin, but, where I see maybe a nice building of 40 units and they're giving us whatever it is, 130 or something, I think if you guys get stuck in the numbers, you're gonna be here way past the end of March.
I don't see any other way to approach it, but.
Well,
yeah.
I would just say
Yeah.
density here.
Oh, Bernie, then on.
Yeah, I think I'm generally agreeing with, where you guys are going, that I think we gave a very, forward-looking, optimistic, some might say, aggressive plan for handling growth. But there are these other considerations that you as the council need to consider. And I think quality of life, that's why I want to see more stated about the impact of traffic on mobility, quality of life, congestion, and so on. And then I think you have to come, all I'm saying is P and Z member, I am very open to suggestion and, I'm open to reason, suggestion, and I could be persuaded, if you give me some good counter arguments. I view this as kind of a provisional document. This is our first cut. It's not cast in stone by any means, and these meetings and, public, we will refine it and we'll get closer. I would ask and note something, and that is that at some point we have a discussion on the urban growth boundary, because up through, when we adopted the 207 agreement, the Planning Commission had a permeable urban growth boundary. And every council, the council that adopted it, put a footnote on, we want a set in stone urban growth boundary. And every council up till now has followed that. Here, when we look at the Meyer property, we're looking at changing that important principle. And I would like a thorough discussion, because after what we heard last week and examining this, I don't think this gives an accurate picture of the facts on the ground between the Meyer possible development and our relationship to Pitkin County, who has been our most stalwart ally in limiting suburban sprawl into the county. And I can't see turning that upside down after thinking about it, and are turning our back on them when we have Eagle County, who does not believe density instead of sprawl. Clearly, they think density goes wherever development suggests it. So I see that density instead of sprawl as kind of, it's just a mantra, it's a saying. Everybody's going to agree with it, but no, it should mean something. And I am withdrawing my support of the Meyer property affordable component A, and I would like time to discuss it with the council in detail and time to discuss it with Pitkin County at that meeting.
Auden, then Bill.
So, when I hear protecting quality of life, I think it's code for don't build anything more in town. And what worries me is that if you do that, do you then end up with people, causing development down valley, people driving in from down valley because there's work up valley, and it doesn't solve the problem. So that's where my focus on density in the core comes from. I think we were given dense versions of dense options in town because it's in the town and that's where density goes. And I think this question about, what's the carrying capacity, which the valley's been asking since the 70s. Pitkin County and Aspen didn't solve the problem in the 70s with growth controls. The West End is not a good example of how towns should be. So I think the answer is that we're not saying, I think we generally agree. We're essentially saying, we're not saying unlimited growth in the town. We're saying we should treat the valley as a whole, and that we should aspire to house the workforce. And we know that from studies that have been done already, what the bed needs are for the workforce. So if you say, well, that's the limit, that's how far we're going, then you get to a number, Gary, the impossible number of what is the limit. And if you look at the plan, I think this group, yes, there's some division, but we generally agree. Rob, if you're an outlier, it's still 6-1, the P&Z agreed that there should be most density generally on Clark's. There should be the next level of density on Jadwin. South side, I think could be some flexibility, and maybe that comes down a little bit. I don't agree that the Myers parcel should be expanded. I think they can build housing for their children and monetize that property based on the 2007 plan. And within those parameters, there's general agreement here. So what I'd love to see is this council approve the plan as close as we can get, because broadly speaking, we're talking about slight numbers of tweaks on particular parcels, but seems to me 80% there.
I like that. Bill?
I wanted to make a couple really broad comments. First off, when it comes to these parcels, it's not like, when you look at the numbers, like the numbers up there, it's not like that's what you get. It's not like at the end of the 10 years when this plan is done, we're gonna have that. We've carried those parcels for a long time and got nothing. It's really only a tool for when someone presents something. We're not building this community here ourselves. We have to wait for some person to figure out that they can make money doing that. And so far in Basalt, that hasn't happened. I mean, because Basalt has not been a friendly place for the development community, and so they're pretty much
We have approved everything.
petrified of us.
Why do you say that? Why do people
That's what
say
they tell me.
that?
When I pitch a project in Basalt, they go, "Are you insane?" I mean, really.
We approve everything that comes before
But
us.
in any event, we don't get that. I mean, that's not what's gonna happen. These are the parcels on the flume are parameters for us to work with when something comes to us. And then we use that as a means of saying, no, I don't think so, or this is a good place for that. So I don't wanna get too flipped out about the sum total of all these things. Because it's just, it hasn't happened yet, and it's probably not gonna happen. But it does help us when it gets there, when it gets to the discussion. As far as the UGB is concerned, and Gary will remember this, that was a black hole, that conversation. And it was messy and unfun, and our porosity on the, if I remember correctly, on the UGB was for 100% affordable housing only, but it consumed a massive amount of time, and I don't really want us to waste our time with that. We can still keep having this discussion. All we have to do is say in the master plan that we think generally it's a good idea to hold to the UGB, because to have anything set in stone, we don't know what's gonna happen 20 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 5 years from now. We just don't. But I think we should tread lightly on that one. There's no reason to waste our time with it beyond what we've already said. And I think we have a pretty good framework for how the UGB has worked and how we handle it. We haven't done a lot of flipping around with it. And we did include the tree farm, and that was a mistake, but we included it because we wanted them to annex. We thought if we did it, they'd annex. Well, that was a bad idea. It didn't work that way.
I'll second that. It was a
But
bad idea.
it seemed like a good idea at the time, but in life, many things work that way. But I do wanna make a comment is, since I first moved to Basalt, which is a while ago, it's changed a lot. This used to be a blue collar community. And you used to be able to buy a house for under $100,000. There were a few more, but that was kind of what it was. And it's changed a lot since then. Both of my neighbors are second homeowners. I don't even know them. One of them I've never even seen, and they've owned the house for like 8 years. Though I have talked to their attorneys. Their attorneys didn't like where my kid's swing set was. So, it's the nature of the community has changed a large amount. And, when I'm driving home, sometimes I drive through the West End, which is a beautiful place. And on the way out of town, there's this one house. And in the garage of the house, which they open quite a bit to show this off, they have his and hers Ferraris. And I just don't want the decisions that we do here to impact our town in a way that causes us to have his and her Ferraris. And so I want to think about that. And so, and a lot of those types of things had to do with, the growth management plan and things like that caused that sort of stuff to happen. But we just have to, when we talk about, growth levels, we have to, there's pluses and minuses, and there's always unintended consequences, and so we have to be mindful of that. But my main comment was about the flumes, and I just want to take these things with a grain of salt. They're tools. They're not, we're not saying, you know, we'll get all those numbers. Yeah, that's what we'll look like. No, it's not going to happen.
Ryan?
We talk about all the housing we're gonna build, and I just wonder where we're gonna employ these people. And on all these options, you see affordable housing and workforce housing, and we are never gonna build our way out of any of these problems. And until we can address the wage gap that is throughout this valley, and the reason that homes aren't affordable and that there aren't enough jobs to support some of the home values in this town, it's a problem. And I don't know, we are somewhat of a second homeowner community, and I said that when I was running, and people were like, you can't say that, and I'm like, it's kind of true. And so there is a balance there where there are people that want to live here, and they might want to live here just during the summer. That's not a bad thing, but it's something to address as a town. Of we can't build enough affordable housing. There's always going to be a demand for it. And so I just wonder where we create the jobs to help people survive and strive in this community, just as general.
Okay, let me just try this one thing. I'm kind of thinking that maybe we are able to move forward kind of where Auden was suggesting, that we do seem to kind of agree on the big ticket items on Clark's parcel and maybe a couple other parcels in town, maybe being a little bit less dense than what has been proposed, or much less dense. And I think we are tending to agree on the Myers parcel as well. That still doesn't tell me where we go from here, except for I think we can narrow it down a little bit from all the comments. I think we still have to look at it parcel by parcel at the next meeting, or we're not gonna get finished with this.
Right.
So, what do you think? Can you do it by the next meeting?
Well, we have the information that we need. The issue at the next meeting will just be, we'll probably only have like a half an hour, I would say, but we can knock out a couple things. I mean,
Well, the
I'd
other
like to
thing
update you
is
on
that
where we are.
I am open to special meetings. If those on this council wanna see this through, then we have to be willing to commit to that and not say, well, except for if it isn't convenient. So,
Yeah, like,
I can.
I'd say, this
Like
is
the
a major
13th?
priority.
Like the 13th?
what's the 13th?
It's a Thursday?
A Thursday after our next council meeting.
Thursday?
Yes.
Oh, the Thursday after our next council meeting.
That's Thursday,
Works for me.
February 13th.
Yeah, we'll have to make sure the room's available, but
Oh, there's a CML thing that day, just FYI.
we'll have it at 6, so.
We can't do it on the off Tuesday because P and Z has the room.
P and Z has big meetings those days. We have Picken County and Eagle County coming.
Okay, well,
And
I can,
Our mountain board is proposing their meeting for the 13th.
I think we just try to find a date. once we
Okay,
try to
I'll
it.
do it separate.
yeah, let's do
I'll
it
do it.
separately.
But I won't, we won't try to get absolutely everyone because we won't be able to.
We may not.
I-
Agenda right now is to get.
Okay, did you have a closing argument?
No, I just kind of wanted to be here in case there were other questions. I think most of the things were touched on. I guess what I would say is I really encourage, especially, it definitely seems like each of you has a particular thing that's kind of your own kind of hot button in a way that you're embracing. And I think a lot of them are there in the document. When you look at, like, there's an entire goal and objective around annexation, regional growth, and cooperation. And so, there's other objectives about our workers and our economy. So between the goals and objectives and then projects. And so I think to be able to look to the plan and some of those things that are really resonating with you personally, and those are the places where then we're looking for that feedback. Did we go far enough? Did we go too far? Do we need to go further, deeper, whatever, more creative? I think those are the things to then kind of review for an eye to it. And then I guess my next question, just based on key parcels, are what information do you all need? Is it really just digging into each of them? I kind of echo Rob in a way that I guess I'd be very careful that we're not sitting here like a live auction, right? I mean, I just think, can I hear 30? Can I hear 60? I mean, there'll be no basis in that discussion. Whereas I think this understanding around the key parcel as we have them written is to give someone parameters and an understanding of how something might come together on a property. Ultimately, two things will govern what someone can do. The existing zoning is whatever they can do by right on that particular parcel, period, at the end. If they want to change that existing zoning, this document now governs what that is. And in a way, that's two different things. One, it's primarily the flume. What land use designation did we put on it, and what densities do we have on that land use designation, right? And then secondarily is the chapters we have about those key parcels. So I think it's really important, if we do this work session and we're focusing really critically on these key parcels, that we not go too far on the numbers. Because really, I think that that is a rabbit hole, and remembering to back up. And as you come back on the key parcels and the pieces that we thought about, right, really start looking at some of the data, you know, so the live polling, I mean, and we did ask, do you know, 1 to 2 stories, 2 to 3, 2 to 4 stories, you know, things like that around different parcels. Southside is a great example where both, when asked, you know, no more growth in Southside, greenfield expansion in Southside, and more density in Southside. The more density in the greenfield got the votes. We had to make harder decisions recognizing that density in Southside would trigger these huge infrastructure projects, so that one got narrowed down. It's closer to schools, but further from transit. Jadwin is closer to transit than Clark's. So I think really come with that eye to what your parameters are for those parcels, as much as maybe a particular number.
I think we're still gonna have to get down to the parcels, and, you know, I don't think we're gonna have an auction, but I think we are gonna need to talk low, medium, high.
Totally.
Gary?
That's what I was gonna say. It's really not, because we talked about numbers and we got into a massive rabbit hole about numbers in the past. It's really just about, what do you see as a land use prerogative? Is it medium density? Is it high density? Because that's what drives the numbers. And do you want, and I think that's where we really just need to stay more focused on, because that gives the direction to the next person who owns that property, that if you come to the town for annexation, you can expect this.
Right.
And the land use
And the
part.
idea of incentives, I think there is this sort of what's there, what do we want to encourage, and what would we be willing to give? I think those are really great parameters on some of those key parcels. It would be good to come back with in that discussion. I know I was tongue-in-cheek on live auction, but
Yes.
nailing it down.
So in the next meeting, it is something that we have asked for. We would love to see some more options, and those would include incentives that you were just talking about, and then as well, low, medium, and high density options for the key parcels.
So you want us to design new options for the parcels and come with what the incentives would be between a low and a high?
I don't necessarily, you don't need to go through a design, a development exercise, but provide us just with, and it doesn't have to, at some point it does come to numbers, and you can make it the size of a circle. It doesn't, you know, so that we don't have to be looking at numbers, but we need to have some other options.
Well,
As well, and a menu of aspirational incentives that can be added to this plan.
Just some ideas.
Ideas,
Yeah.
popcorn.
Well, I don't understand, are you speaking for what you think this group wants? Is that, we've agreed to that, or?
I am putting something out there that we can, again, one voice of 7, and so it sounded like Gary was on board.
Well, I wouldn't say,
Okay,
no.
okay.
I wasn't necessarily on board. I was just trying to go back to, you know, the thing is, we have the options. The incentive piece, I would say, if everyone loves, it just, what are some of the, what do people think could be an incentive for it? I mean, I don't, I mean, how do you do that? So that, to me, that's an option, but we have low, medium, and high-density residential, we have the potential for affordable, we have all that, and we can discuss that. That, I don't know if I need different options. Yeah, cause I think if you start getting into, you know, we do a low-high and a medium-low, or something like that, and we're gonna go through a rabbit hole of destruction. It's just, I think we have those options, it'd just be cool to see if you could come up with some ideas for incentive.
The only suggestion would be perhaps what's there by right. I wouldn't necessarily, you know, we could do what's an
Exactly, yeah.
underlying zoning or something like that.
That
What
would
could they
be-
do by right?
That's really helpful.
Might be, at this point, your lowest, unless this is a board talking about, you know,
Maybe not, but since most of this is just zoned A of R 10, so it's 1 unit per 10 acres or whatever, so it
Yeah,
might be a
so
little-
Good to know,
Good to know of what exists.
So are we, without like starting over around the whole table again, do you feel like you sort of have the gist of the group?
Can you take all 7 ideas and just
I mean,
make
just,
it happen?
just make it so.
Yeah.
I really don't think we're that far. I think we're just talking a little bit different language as we go around. But I believe Auden is right that we're not that far. I think we all just want to know, is this low, medium, or high? What's the land use? What's the underlying? What can they do without asking, you know, basically. So I think that's good enough for me. Is it okay? The rest?
Yes, but one of the things that's on my list of questions is the incentives and talking about that in more depth. So in line with what Jen and Gary were asking.
So incentives, just ideas, don't rewrite.
Yeah.
So, can we, oh,
Just-
sorry, Auden.
Do you feel you have direction? Cause I'm not super clear on what we're asking, that's fine, incentive piece, but what are we asking in
So
terms
I think that if I hear correctly, we have 4 key parcels. Primary parcels, sorry, 4 primary parcels. We're gonna focus on those primary parcels. Really, we would just bring back another column in the table that said on those parcels, what's their underlying zoning? What can they do by right? And that'll be your starting point, just because that's use by right as it exists, having nothing to do with this master plan. Then you have to have kind of that continuing debate. If someone comes in, why haven't they developed? Probably because use by right is not highest and best use, et cetera. But that'd be your lowest point. So my hunch would be we're doing that just effectively in a table. It just says, you know, I think that'd be the easiest, to not redesign additional options. So that's.
Susan, are you
what I
good?
hear.
You
And
don't,
then
We'll
the
deal, we might have
Okay.
some more, conversation and try to regroup.
Yeah. And we have to make sure that these guys are on board, also just kind of budget perspective and things like that, so. And incentives, I think we can just pool our heads with P and Z. I know a lot of people have been kind of noodling on what those are, and that would just be a brainstorm, I think.
I mean, I almost thought we were down to the point of looking in the map and looking at what was proposed and whether it's low, medium, or high, and what do we want as a group.
I mean, I kind of think myself, but I let us brainstorm and then
Yeah.
we'll touch base about what we're giving you, because I don't, to some extent, I don't think a lot more information is really that helpful.
No, I don't think so either.
You have, you kind of have 2 scenarios. Do you want something less? And we can talk about incentives and we can give you some options. I would just say that in a week, we do have other things that we are doing.
Right.
So,
And my only last feedback to that is, I think while we can kind of talk about some of the nuances of like how we ask questions and things like that, I very much believe in the integrity of the process that we use for public input. And I think that, including going to some of the landowners and things like that. And so I want to be really conscious of some of those decisions made too much in a vacuum, where then we wouldn't circle back to property owners, to some of the people that and citizens that were able to have input on different areas. And so if we end up with a whole lot more of a delta, you know, I would just be aware of that as a group. And I think there's a lot of information in the data to dig into, and some places where we did ask questions, you know, no development, and there were people that said yes, no, somewhere in the middle. And so trying to dig into that as much as possible, just so we're not magic wanding some of the decisions without being really, I guess, respectful of the integrity of the existing.
Okay, one last one, Rob, and then I think I'm gonna ask that Ryan, if he feels like they need to, at the end of the day, when they're trying to rework this, make some phone calls and have some quick meetings, because I don't think it's gonna get clear if it's not clear now. Rob?
You said low, medium, or high, and I don't know if you mean density
Yeah, I
or
meant density.
number of units. And
Density.
that just needs to be clarified. because
Density.
Both, I think, kind of need to be discussed.
Just density.
Okay.
Because I think we sort of agreed that counting numbers might go on forever. Yeah. Can we call it a night on this one?
I just want to say one thing, but no, this is nothing different. As we were talking about the incentive part, that's something that we have been talking about internally as well. So I think that's sort of the natural direction that I think
Okay.
would be very profitable for us.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much for all your hard work, patience with us, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
and our patience with each other, because we're so awesome. Thanks. Okay. So I think our next deal is an executive session, so if we could start shutting down the
Still need
TV and,
We do.
yeah.
Mayor, I move
And
that.
actually, before you make the motion, the portion of it that reads for a conference with the town's attorneys should not be in there. So
What?
begin with for the purpose of discussing the purchase.
Oh, for the purpose of discussing.
Okay. Mayor, I move that the town council enter executive session for the purposes of discussing the purchase, acquisition, lease transfer, or sale of property interest in accordance with CRS 24-6-4024A, more specifically, potential property purchase for a public works facility.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay.
How long do you think this will take?
Hours.
Hours.
Oh, that's fine. Is that okay?
Go pee.
Run to the